Hello and welcome to Spelltable Showcase MTG. This is the series Spellcaster Soapbox, where our content creators voice their opinions on everything Magic the Gathering. We hope you enjoy the episode and be sure to subscribe for the next video drop. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Spellcaster Soapbox on Spelltable Showcase MTG. I'm Evan. I get to hang out with my good friend Jared. We are going to talk to you and tell you about the newest set coming out, Secrets of Strixhaven. We have given each other an opportunity to look through all the cards and note what's really most exciting for us. So we're going to be covering every color that is in the set. We're going to go through all of the pie wedges, and we're also going to talk through every applicable CMC, converted mana cost, and tell you what cards to be looking out for, what's unique about them, what we like about them. And yeah, we'll see how that all goes. Please, this is our first one, so give us any feedback. Tell us how this went. Tell us what cards we missed. We'd love for this to be an interaction and engagement as far. I only have two caveats for this one. One is no one's perfect. We may mispronounce. We may stutter. Give us your grace. We appreciate it. We're all trying to have fun here. And then the second one is there's going to be two parts, all in one video, but two parts. We're going to give you the diatribes. We're going to be talking back and forth about the cards, what we like, having engagement and conversation. If you don't have time for that, if you're going straight to MagicCon, you want to learn, you're going straight to buying some cards and pre-ordering them off your favorite site or local game store, we are going to have a section at the end, and you'll see it in the chapters, where it's just the snippets of us saying all the cards. Just category, card, category, card. And if you just want that, to see all the card images that we think you should really pay attention to, you can go there, and you'll have basically the video cut down in to a third of its time. So if you need the quick and dirty, check for the end of the video. But if you're here to engage and talk with us and learn about the cards we're interested in, we're set. We're here for it. Okay. So Jared, why don't you introduce yourself, and then why don't you kick us off with our first category, which is going to be colorless/generic mana only.
I can do that. All right. So thank you for having me, Evan. When we were kicking around and trying to do our own podcast, we're here now. I'm excited, and we're excited to share with all of you guys. This is an exciting set. I haven't already touched on the fact that first one ever, and being a little ambitious, but I think it'll be a good format to have a good exchange with the community here in terms of, we're doing commander cards as well as cards from the set. 5 commanders for our first time doing this, so we're excited. But that's all you really need to know about me. I'm Jared. I'm with the Spelltable Showcase community, and this is way too much that you already care about. Let's get started. So I'm going to kick us off already by going straight to colorless. And Evan, you said that we have to go by colors and color pairs. I respect that. I'm sure the community respects that. You didn't say I couldn't cheat though, so I went with lands, and sue me, because I feel like, look, Evan will touch on this, and you've seen his awesome commander compatibility episodes. My favorite's Jensen. I was excited for Converge. I was excited to get into the colorless Converge cards. They weren't the ones that blew me away. So with that, let's start about what did blow me away, and I guarantee you it's the same thing that you guys saw already, right? So the first one, the main one, that if I had to choose one, I think far and away the best colorless card in this set, particularly for commander, is Petrified Hamlet. That's the one that says, when this land enters, choose a land card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name can't be activated unless they're mana abilities. Lands with the chosen name have tap, add colorless, and the card itself comes out untapped and also can add for colorless itself. So what I liked about this one, this card effectively becomes an extra strip mine, except you don't need to play mana to activate it, right? Utility lands, especially when you get into monocolored decks and even dual color decks, they're so powerful in general, but especially in the commander format. Because even if their abilities are powerful but slightly off rate in terms of mana efficiency. They can also tap for mana, right? Making them a dual threat. And then more than that, even the dual threat nature of this is that in many cases, they're so hard to interact with, right? Especially Evan's been a little more adventurous than me. I've been a little bit more generic, and I've been playing really within that back bracket 2, early kind of less competitive bracket 3 power level decks. And at that level, we're not running a lot of, mass land destruction, which means that you're really just reserving a card or 2 cards that have the ability to target a land. Sometimes you'll have cards like a Vindicate that can target multiple things, but a lot of the more powerful, even more versatile mana removal, the card removal in general type cards out there are things like Anguished Unmaking or Withering, which, are very clear that they specify non-land permanent, which means that if you have a powerful ability on a land, it's tough to interact with. So this set is really one of the first in a while that really lets people fight fire with fire. You're having a very tough to interact with ability on a land that's going to make it easy to neutralize, tough to interact with abilities on other lands. And arguably the best part is, I know some people follow different templates out there and some just kind of do their own thing. But regardless of what you do in terms of how you make your deck, this essentially in many cases will free you up to add another non-land card into your deck, because you can automatically check the box on a card that counters and neutralizes lands that also counts as a land for you. With that, I've got a backup, but Evan, I'm curious what your number 1 is.
Yeah, so first, totally, I think that was a great pick, Jared. For all those swarm yards out there, the rogues passages, there's a good answer for it. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, so yeah, my number 1 for colorless is an artifact. It is Diary of Dreams. Ooh. So it's a 2-cost generic artifact book, in case book, you're doing a book synergy. So whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a page counter on this artifact. And then you've got 5, tap it, draw a card. This ability costs 1 less to activate for each page counter on this artifact. So whether or not you're doing Spellslinger, whether or not you're doing Proliferate, just having instants and sorceries in your deck is going to make this a good draw spell. You may have better ones in your deck, but if you've got anything that synergizes within Diary of Dreams, I think there's going to be an instant ad for a lot of folks.
No, dude, I think you picked a winner there. I think it's one of the more slept-on cards in this set, and I think that, any additional sources of card draw, if you're going to have one mechanic that you're not worried about overdoing in a deck, it's card draw. I think that was a nice little sneaky find.
Okay, so I'm going to start us off for white. This, my choice was Augusta, Order Returned. So this is the legendary creature, Spirit Advisor, for 3 total mana, 2 and 1 white. It's a 1/3, flying and vigilance. And whenever Augusta attacks, each player exiles a card from their graveyard. When 1 or more non-land cards are exiled this way, put that many +1/+1 counters on target attacking creature. So for me, first, the keywords, flying and vigilance, makes this a strong creature, especially if you're doing a draft or something sealed. But it's going to be good for any sort of commander or something around that format as well. And then this is an attack trigger that I thought was really good. Not always are you going to want to put the Graveyard Hate as specific cards, because if your meta isn't interacting with the graveyard, it doesn't necessarily matter. But I figured this was an extra bonus to power up either Augusta or one of your other creatures and start just removing some of those creatures, whether they be creature cards or other cards from the graveyard that you don't want to see again while plussing up Augusta. So I felt like this was a good one. I think it's got a lot of special synergies in there. It's a strong creature.
Yeah, so I mean, first thing is, I think you picked another good one. I think the combination of the 2 keywords on a 3-drop is pretty cool. And I see what you're saying. It's like just strong body, a little bit of, targeted removal or graveyard hate, a little bit of +1 counter synergy. I guess my question for you is, do you see this going in every deck as a generic good stuff that checks multiple boxes, or do you think that this really shines in certain decks, and what would those decks be? Would it be things like your Jetmir deck? Would it be things that have a +1 counter synergy, where the counters are doing more things? And like, I mean, I think of a deck that I might bring up again later, so sue me. But I think this would be pretty cool in the Tidus deck, right? Where you're like you're adding counters on their own accord, and then you're going to combat and you're removing a counter from one creature and putting on another creature with Tidus, right? And there's all these abilities attached to putting counters on things, right? Like, I think that could be a good card in that, but I was wondering what your vision of it was.
Yeah, 100% Jared. Yeah, anything proliferate, spirit synergy, which I know the Lorehold commander deck is focused on. But really, it's about the attack. And so as long as you're a deck that focuses on combat, putting 3 +1/+1 counters in a commander game on any target creature, which might be Augusta, makes it a 4/7 right off the bat, off one combat. Sounds pretty sweet. And of course, as long as cards are in the graveyard. And they're technically need to be non-land. Jared, yep.
That's fair, I guess. But I mean, violence is never the answer. I'm just kidding. That's a great pick. And I like your vision for it. All right. So preface for me, and Evan will vouch for me because he's known me for a while, but like, I kind of pride myself in choosing the out of the box things, right? As I'm sure we all do. That's what makes Commander fun, right? We get to innovate, we get to be creative. We're not playing CEDH where it's, the most pristine, optimized meta where only certain types of things work. We like to have fun here. With that being said, for this white selection, I could not do that. There is one card I could not ignore that you'll probably see in other spots too. This card just warrants debate, and I need to bring it up now. So that card is Erode. It is a 1-mana instant called Erode, and simply stated, it lets you destroy target creature or planeswalker. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So immediately, I'm sure this is kind of ringing the radars of a lot of different people, right? I'm sure you're thinking Swords to Plowshares. I'm sure you're thinking Path to Exile. If that's the case, good. That's kind of exactly where my headspace was with this, right? So, I mean, I've been playing Commander, for reference, probably about 5 or 6 years now. And Evan, I know you jumped in basically like a week or two after I did, because we had the same people get me into it and to get you into it. Anyway, long story short is, feel free to check me on this, man. But I think this is the first card since as long as at least I've been playing that people are saying really enters that Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile conversation. So I know there are cards like, when everyone was playing Duskmourn, the one that was set in essentially the Demon Valgavoth, right? And there was a card called Unwanted Remake that warranted some comparisons too, but it gave people Manifest Dread, and people didn't want to give it 2/2 that could still become a real creature later, their opponent. So it was quickly a part of this conversation and then quickly removed from the conversation because of it destroying instead of exiling on top of that. The thing here, though, is Erode's already being considered around higher, right? Because you're trading Path to Exile or Swords to Plowshares benefit for the flexibility to also take care of Planeswalkers, right? You're destroying versus exiling, but Planeswalkers are on the menu now. And in a lot of color sets, color pairs even, you're not devoting that extra spot to just destroying Planeswalkers. Sometimes you're taking care of that with something that destroys non-land permanents. We mentioned Anguish Unmaking. Sometimes, I'm thinking about, the white-black Orzhov pairing or, Silverquill in this set, right, depending on what you call it, right? But that white and black pairing where, there are cards like Fracture, right, where it's a couple of different things you could go for to include Planeswalkers. Sometimes if you're in red, you're doing direct damage. But more often than not, you're not devoting cards to destroy a target Planeswalker. But you are devoting, especially the 1-mana cards, to destroy a target creature because you need that efficiency against a threat that you see more often than any other card, arguably. This is in that conversation now because sometimes it's worth it to sacrifice having the ability to exile for the ability to destroy, but also go after these Planeswalkers. In terms of the land coming untapped, tapped, like that comes in very similar to, Path to Exile to begin with. So it's really just a 1-for-1 trade. And then I'm going to say the cliche thing that everyone knows is true, right? It's that 99% of the decks that are running this card aren't considering if this is better than Path to Exile. They're running both of these, right? So if you're running any set with white in any significant portion in your 99, you're now running Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares, and now Erode. I think that's a very big statement that this card goes 1, 2, 3 with those guys.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, Jared. You know, we had a Spellcaster Soapbox episode where we compared and talked about some of the staples that we often get in Commander precons. I'd be really intrigued to see if precons in the future start adding in Erode either in addition to or as a replacement to Swords or Path. And I totally agree that people that are running both of them, or at least one of them, are starting to figure out where to add more. What I think's been really great with our picks is that we're highlighting that this set is trying to cover maybe some of the gaps and some of the niche that they want to let you continue running your strategy while also ensuring that, that you're taking care of some of those pesky lands that keep messing you up, but you don't want to put us, hope that you find your one land destruction card. You want it to be part of your strategy going forward. You want to exile cards from the graveyard while continuing your strategy there. And here you're destroying potentially planeswalkers as well. While you may not be a combat-focused deck or strategy, you now have an answer. Yep, great choice. I think, Erode's real good. Okay, that's white. Jared, do you want to jump into blue?
I do. Blue, I gave this lofty preface about how I'm trying to think outside the box. So this time I'm followed through on my word, and it might be a problem because I think I overdid it. I mean, I think a lot of attention around the cards with things like, things like, I don't know, little card called Ancestral Recall staple to them, things I probably should have looked at in a little bit more for consideration. This time, I went straight to kind of something a little more out there. Really did try to go for the splashy things, but always not to the extent where we're just trying to do what everyone else is doing, but also because in order to not go with the splashy things, you truly got to believe that sometimes simplicity is key and that sometimes the home run cards are right in front of you. So with all that being said, I think people might be sleeping on the Pensive Professor. I really do, right? It's a, one generic, 2 blue card that comes out. It's a creature. It's a human wizard, right? So wizard synergies is something I know that people are caring about more and more. There's some good synergies even within this set that people are sleeping on. But the main ability, and I'm going to skip around the card for a second, you guys will understand why in a second, is that its ability is whenever one or more +1/+1 counters are put on this creature, draw a card. And then on its own, it also has the ability Increment, which is whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana you spent is greater than this creature's power or toughness, put a 1/1 counter on this creature. Why do I think this is so good? Well, there's a certain card that shall not be named because it's not part of this set that just came out fairly recently as part of Edge of Eternities that lets you put on counters for or draw cards for every single counter you put on a card. This is not that good, but this is pretty damn close. This is, for those familiar with the card Fathom Mage, right, which is a 4 mana that anytime you put a counter on it, you draw a card. This is a slightly worse effect, but at 1 mana less than Fathom Mage. And Fathom Mage is as staple as it comes in +1 counter decks, and +1 counter decks are also as staple as they come. They're one of the most popular techniques to build around across every color set in Commander right now, and they have been for quite a while. So I love the Pensive Professor because I think that if you put this in the right deck, and one of the things that, both me and Evan and I, we talked about ahead of this, we're striving not to just deviate to the Commander decks that we have, right? So I have approximately 10 Commander decks. I'm not just trying to think of my stuff. I'm trying to think of things that have mass appeal. +1 counters have mass appeal. I mentioned the Titus deck earlier. I don't own a Titus deck. But the thing that makes this card so potent is that when you compare it to other effects that are draw a card every turn, you want to find things that beat that rate. So this, you can do it in your sleep, right? Because let's say you're playing that Titus deck, and there's other decks too, right? I mean, obviously there's a card called the Traxa that lets you proliferate on your end step. That's something you do, right? I run a Jared Carthalion 5-color deck where, you're putting counters on for every color something is, right? So you're getting this like free ability to do that. If you're running anything with a connive, right? There's multiple ways to do this and just get +1 counter synergies. But for the most part, imagine you have any set piece, pick a set piece. I'm going to choose Titus for now. That lets you put a counter on just passively throughout the turn. You're doing something that involves mana. Maybe that's casting something that lets you proliferate. Maybe that's something that puts counters on its own. So that's one set right there, whatever you're playing that turn in terms of mana. Then, assuming you have a setup piece, like, something like a Galvany Township, right? That, will let you put counters on things. Or, something like, a Karnland. Or beyond that, let's talk about the Titus, where you're moving to combat. You're able to remove a counter from one thing and put it on Pensive Professor. You've now drawn 2 cards in your turn already, right? And then imagine if there's other effects, like maybe the spell you cast also triggers the increment effect, right? Because maybe you're casting a 4-mana spell that will then put a counter on it. You've now drawn 3 cards in your phase alone. If you have instants, right? I mean, there are a lot of good instants. I think it's called Snake Veil. You know which one I'm talking about, right? There are cards that defensively will give a creature hexproof at instant speed for a mana that'll also put a counter on things and things of that nature, right? So the point is, you can do this, right, to easily get 3 draws on your turn alone without trying too hard, and then also hold mana up to get a draw on your opponent's turn while also playing defensive smart magic. So I think this card is, in a world where splashier things with crazy powerful abilities stapled onto other cards are kind of what are drawing people's attention, I think this is a card that's going to see more use cases and win more games, and also be somewhat less threatening than some of those big splashy cards, which is going to let it stay on the field and generate value while your opponents waste their, hard-earned removal spells on other opponents' creatures.
Yep, 100% Jared. Pensive Professor was also my number 1 pick for blue.
No way.
So, and there are tons of good blue cards in this set. So for that one to be number 1, like, don't sleep on this one. Increment is an interesting take on Evolve, but focuses on the mana cost instead. Starts at a 0/2, so you're going to get something off that first spell. And if you've got the ability to move counters around as well, you're definitely drawing a lot with this one. So don't miss out. And then you can let us know in the comments if you think that's hair on top of his head or maybe like a headpiece. And then he's definitely got the Braveheart. He's definitely a Braveheart enthusiast. Totally. It's a great choice. Oh, great choice. So that means I got to go to my second. And I think this one is not as good as Pensive Professor, but I think it's really interesting. I think it's fun. People can use it in both offensive and defensive ways. So I'll just talk about it real fast. This is Exhibition Tidecaller. This is a 1 mana, just 1 blue, Djinn Wizard, 0/2 with Opus, which means whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, target player mills 3 cards. If 5 or more mana was spent to cast that spell, that player mills 10 cards instead. So that really jumped out at me. There are a lot of, like, maybe it's good for mill, maybe it's not, what have you. I think what's also interesting as this game has evolved is that there's been a lot of ability to do the self-mill, and then you get the best card out of your deck, what have you. So milling 3 cards already works in your favor a lot, especially on such an easy thing as just casting an instant or sorcery. And then you can decide to go big and make everything pushing for the 10 and getting people to lose 1/10 of their deck if you're playing Commander, or a larger percentage if you're playing one of the other formats. So that just seemed like a card that's making milling very viable. I hope it stays at a lower price. It's a rare, so I fear that it may get to some of those higher costs. But I thought it was really interesting, especially for 1 mana. That makes milling really viable, I think, for a lot of folks.
No, I think that's a great pick. I saw that one, and it's funny because I didn't see anyone include that card yet in any videos. I mean, again, we're trying to do this fairly early, right? So people can enjoy their pre-release weekend, knowing that people have already started sparking these conversations, right? With that being said, from the initial just first reveals of the card and what people were saying, that one seemed to be all over the place. I actually think the price will stay fairly low. Fingers crossed for people running around mill decks, but I feel like mill decks are like kind of their own niche, right? And I think that that alone will keep the price down, but I could be wrong. Let us know if you agree or disagree in the comments there, but I think it's a really unique tool for really unique decks.
Yes, and we'd love to hear if people are just throwing it into their, spell slinger can now be pseudo mill, right?
Yeah.
Anything that's just doing a little bit of graveyard love or anything like that can add this in to try to add on to what their graveyard has or what somebody else's graveyard has.
Yeah.
Let's get into black. This choice for black for me is Withering Curse. This is a 1 black sorcery. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn, but there's also infusion on it, which is if you gained life this turn, destroy all creatures instead. There are a number of cards in this set with that sort of infusion piece that if you gain life this turn, and it's just if you gain life, you don't need to hit a certain threshold for life gain on it. If you play one of those tap lands, Jungle Hollow or something like that, that gives you 1 life, and then you play Withering Curse, you're destroying all creatures. So a lot of board wipes out there, whether it be in black or in white, are 4, 5 plus mana. So seeing this as 1 black with potentially in the right decks a very easy clause to hit, this is a 3 mana board wipe, which seems really good. All creatures get -2/-2 is also really good. You may destroy the token deck out there that you're challenging that has just lots of little mites running around. So some versatility on that. And I think as far as just mono black, that was really, I think it's a really good pick there. So Jared, did you have the same one? Did you choose the same?
I think it's such a good pick. I chose it myself. But yeah, no, I think it's a fantastic card. I think that, when you're evaluating a card for its commander potential, it doesn't necessarily need to work for every deck, but kind of like we were talking about with the +1 counters. If you're in a graveyard deck, odds are you're running things that are going to care about life gain, life loss in some capacity, which means it's going to be really easy to hit that second form. I think what we, talked about how we're not necessarily trying to just make this relevant for ourselves. We're trying to make this relevant beyond, just decks that we own. I'm going to give you a full disclosure right here and say that I do own a Y'shtola deck, and I feel comfortable bringing that up here because of the unique synergy and because Y'shtola is currently number 5 on EDH Rec last time I checked, right? So I figure this is something that could help multiple people with Y'shtola decks and also help multiple people gang up on Y'shtola deck when they see this card, right? Because I think it's a really unique synergy, right? Because when you play this card with Y'shtola out, you're casting a non-creature spell, 3 mana or greater. That in turn is going to trigger Y'shtola's damage and life gain abilities, meaning this card essentially reaches the conditions for its wipe, the mode you'd actually want, every time Y'shtola is out, just on its own.
Wow. So
that's a pretty scary synergy, something to work with. It also works with a bunch of other cards out there too. Like the new Dina, I think this could be fantastic with. If you have a Servandam, Sunstar Exemplar, same deal. But yeah, I think it's really just a fantastic pick. And I think the one last thing I wanted to say on it is, for the longest time, at least as long as I've been playing, the suite of black removal spells, it started with Toxic Deluge, and then it kind of became a pause. I don't know, like, is it Damnation? Is it, something that's a little bit more mana intensive that does a little more? Like what is the second best board wipe in black? It was debatable. Obviously, things like Blasphemous Edict came out, and then, okay, cool, like for 5 mana, you can do something that sacrifices, so it gets around destruction. But then during the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles set, when Game Over came out, people were really excited because it was an inexpensive removal based on a condition that an opponent has already lost, or anyone has really lost a significant portion of life prior to going. I think that it was interesting, Game Over, but I think that at least in the metas I'm playing, like, you can't. I think it's not something you can rely on. You can always rely on someone losing life, but I mean, some people run strategies where it's, I'm going to hit someone for 40 life at once. Sometimes when it's you that has a low life, you're not always going to be in position to like then be able to cast game over. So I think it's good, but I don't think it like clearly slotted into the number 2 slot besides Toxic Deluge. Withering Curse might, right? Withering Curse, because of everything Evan mentioned, in the decks that are running this, you're never going to have to worry about actually triggering this. It's a very reliable way for a 3-mana wipe in a color that you can afford to have things that are a little bit more on the nose destroy, because you have the synergies with cards like Toxic Deluge and now Blasphemous Edict, where you have other things that can get at Indestructible. So you can afford to have one, even though it just destroys, 3-mana board wipe. And I think Withering Curse is going to check a lot of boxes for a lot of decks.
Yep, 100%. All right, Jared. So what's your backup for black?
So I realized I actually had 2, but I'm going to talk about one more than the other. There's a card that I wasn't thinking was my backup, but as we were starting to like slot things into potentially, you know, if we were to rack and stack this by best converted mana cost, there's a card called Leech Collector that whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, this creature becomes prepared, right? By the way, it's a 2-drop, so just 1 generic and a black mana, right? Why are you preparing this creature? Because for an extra mana at sorcery speed, a black mana specifically, it has the ability to cast the spell Bloodletting, which is as simple as each opponent loses 2 life. I think there's a lot of decks that care about life loss in black, especially, as well as some of the more popular color sets, right? I think Golgari, especially now after this new Dina deck, and then obviously with Orzhov, right? The white-black pairing. So my thing is, I think this card might be slept on. Because it's really easy to cast. I think one of the issues, and it'll make perfect sense in a sec when I talk about my other backup for this color, but one of the things, prepared is an awesome mechanic, but I think a lot of thought needs to go into if the card has the phrase, this creature enters prepared, and I think a lot of thought needs to go into how hard it is to prepare. Do you have to risk it in combat, even if it doesn't have any evasion? Things of that nature, right? And then the last thing you have to think about is you are telegraphing the spell that is attached to this player when you play the creature that is your prepared or your potential prepared creature, right? So Leech Collector is exceptionally great because it's only 2 mana and then Bloodletting is only 1 mana. So it makes it a little harder for opponents to predict and counteract. And then also in a suite of cards that have way more powerful spells attached to the prepared creatures and Bloodletting, people will probably let this one go for the most part. And if not, then you're already in a good position because it means that you have quite the engine online in terms of life loss. But Bloodletting on its own, less scary than Ancestral Recall. And the other card it's less scary too is the other card that I thought was going to be my backup for this set, Emeritus of Woe, which is another prepared creature. This one does have the magic words, this creature enters prepared, but it's 4 mana. It is a 5/4, so not exactly the weakest body, but no special keyword abilities. At the beginning of your end step, if 2 or more creatures died this turn, this creature becomes prepared. So again, enters prepared, sufficient to become prepared. So checks 2 out of the 3 boxes we just talked about. And then the spell itself is literally game-changing. It's Demonic Tutor. So 1 in a black, sorcery. Search your library for a card. Put that card into your hand, then shuffle. I still think this is a great card, but the reason I thought that our initial pick of Withering Curse was better, and then maybe even some of these other black cards that are a little bit more efficient to run, it's that the thing that makes Demonic Tutor so powerful is that you're searching your library for any card, which this can do, but at 2 mana, you're probably able to play the card that you're searching for the turn you're searching for. That lets people not necessarily gang up on you. Maybe you're running Demonic Tutor, particularly when opponents are mostly tapped out of mana and there's nothing they can do to respond to you. Or if you have something like a Conqueror's Flail out or anything with an ability to kind of limit your opponent from going at you when you're on turn. But the last thing you want to do is give someone, an opponent, a chance to counter your Demonic Tutor. So yeah, it's nice that with Emeritus of Woe, you potentially have repeatable Demonic Tutor effects. And it's an easy precondition to meet, but it's a lot easier than countering a Demonic Tutor for 2 mana. Either countering a 4 mana creature or blowing it up when it's your turn, right? And everyone's untapping, and in a 4-player commander game, everyone's going to have a chance to blow up the creature to stop you from casting the spell. So I don't want people to think of Emeritus of Woe as demonic tutor on a stick. I think realistically, you have to think of Emeritus of Woe really as a 6-drop, where you're going to play that. You're going to get your 1 demonic tutor in for sure on your turn before people can gang up on you. And then I wouldn't take it for granted that you're able to cast the card that you tutor for with it. So again, I think those other 2 are good, but I think you knocked it out of the park with your first choice, Evan. I think that is the number 1 black.
Thank you, Jared. And good picks. Yeah, I'm glad. I like a number of the prepared creatures. I think that's a really fun mechanic. And I think we've got a number of picks here that'll get to talk on them. And there are plenty of ways to really synergize the preparedness to make sure that, right, you'll actually get to do the spell on the other side.
Okay. This was another tough one where, again, if we got into Magic 5 years ago, my choice would have been different. Not because the card got less powerful or there's been power creep, but because at least in that bracket 2, bracket 3 mana, I've been seeing lower mana costs in the decks that we're seeing, right? I think everything's kind of just moved down half to 3/4 of a mana in terms of decks, right? You're seeing less 4-drops, more 3-drops, less 3-drops, more 2-drops. You guys get the picture, and you all probably feel this every single time you go to your local game store. So I'm not telling you anything new here. So I was between a 7-drop, which maybe we'll get into later, and a 1-drop. And shockingly enough, Evan's laughing because I probably chose similar things. Evan, did you choose Flashback by any chance?
No. I held off on that one. I think it's very cool. Please tell us about it.
Oh, okay, cool. Great minds think alike, but 3 for 3. Anyway, yeah. So I'm going to talk about Flashback. Flashback is a red mana instant. Target instant or sorcery in your graveyard gains Flashback until end of turn. The Flashback cost is equal to its mana cost. And as a reminder, Flashback is a pre-established mechanic. That is, you may cast that card from your graveyard for its Flashback cost, then exile it. There are commanders that do this on their own. 2 of the ones that I tend to favor are Cast Dissident Mage and Narset and Light in Exile, right? But I think, again, we're talking about general suites of cards and mechanics that people use. And Storm is a popular mechanic when you're trying to compound spells on top of spells for extra effects over and over again. And honestly, really, like, at first I wasn't overwhelmed with red, but I think that I went with this one because of the 1 CMC effect, and because there's so many decks out there doing the Storm thing, or any spell slinger where you're casting multiple spells, or even things where you're running a quick cantrip synergy, which you've seen more and more of these days, especially with kind of some of the Voltron commanders that you're seeing in white, red, blue, as well as just red in general. Then even something like a cloud deck. Anyway, my point is that this card is pretty versatile, but it really shines in decks where you're doing things like prowess, right? You're trying to get your creatures stronger. I call it battle mage, right? In the sense where you're casting spells that are pumping creatures, things like Magecraft, which I think came out during the first Strixhaven set, where you're getting extra bonuses for casting spells that are actually buffing the creatures. Some of them you're drawing cards, some of them you're, I'm thinking about Veyron, who was the blue-red commander for all of 30 seconds, along with Niv Mizzet before a little card called Vivi came onto the scene. But was going to say that, he's a guy that gets stronger every single time. He goes up +1/+1 for every spell he casts, and he has ability to double that ability of itself. So again, this is powerful in those decks. And normally in those decks, you have plenty of things in the graveyard to choose from. But I think that the really cool thing about this is that all you need to get some value in decks with things like Magecraft having triggers and payoffs is you just need a card in your graveyard to target. Ideally, you're then casting the thing. But in many situations here, it's the opposite of something like we were just talking about with Emeritus as well. all the time. All you have to do this time is target whatever you're going for. And even if your opponent pulls a fast one and stops you from getting it, you're already getting the cast trigger for Flashback. And sometimes having an extra mana that literally reads this card does nothing, but it triggers all your instant cast triggers in those Stormy decks, in those Prowess decks, in those Magecraft decks is all you really need, right? So imagine like you have something like an Archmage Emeritus or an Archmage of Runes on the field. Imagine you have both of those things on the field. Even if this fizzles or for whatever reason you can't end up casting the card because maybe it's the same exact thing as the Emeritus of Woe that we were just talking about, and you don't have enough mana to play the thing that you're pulling. If you have an Archmage Emeritus and an Archmage of Runes out, you're drawing 2 cards for 1 mana. So again, the setup matters, but I guess my thing is that where a lot of cards in, Magic in general, especially for Commander, right? Like this card is good, but it needs the right setup to be good. With this card, even in decks that aren't built for the mechanics that we just discussed, more often than not, even if you're running like 30, 35 creatures, there's going to be some utility in pulling back an instant. Because if you're running an instant in a creatures-based deck, it probably matters. If you're running something that cares even more about instants, of course, it's going to be even better. But the point is, like, this card, I feel like, will always be good, okay to good, like, a 5 or a 6 out of 10. And in those decks, you don't even need it to hit with anything, and it could be like an 11 out of 10. So I think this is good.
I totally agree with a lot that you said there, Jared. I think another way, or maybe a simplified version of just reading the card is this is another one of your other sorceries or instants, right? Think on the best sorceries and instants that you have, maybe even some of the lower tier ones. Maybe it's just a simple ramp spell, what have you. Just having the ability to play it again might really help because you played it once for some reason, and so now you get to do it again, whether it's targeting something, you're ramping, what have you. Now you've got another one in there for especially something like Commander where it's all singleton. Okay, so my attempt on red is Fateful Tempest. So, and I will say some of this is probably my own bias. As you can tell, I like the interaction and the engagement. So this is a sorcery for 3 total CMC, 2 and a red, and it's got Council's Dilemma on it, which is a classic keyword saying everybody's turn to vote. So starting with you, each player votes for past or present. You mill a card for each past vote. Then, Fateful Tempest deals damage to each opponent equal to the total mana value of cards milled this way. Exile the top card of your library for each present vote. Until the end of your next turn, you may play the exiled cards. So, that was a lot of text to basically say, I think for a lot of, especially Commander games, what this is probably going to shake out to is mill 1 card and deal damage for what it is if you chose past, and then I'm really expecting everybody else to just say present because if they feel that they can't take that damage, and so then this card reads draw 3 or draw 4 that you can play until your next turn. So for something like red, especially, I'm really thinking mono red here, where you're really just trying to get your gas out as soon as you can. That was my pick there to say give everybody sort of a pseudo choice. And either you're going to deal lots of damage and maybe you didn't get to play anything, but Fateful Tempest was a really powerful burn spell, or for something that may lack in the card draw that you really want it to do, that sometimes mono red falls into, you've now got something that drew you 3 or 4 cards that hopefully you can play with what mana remains for 2 turns. I think that's something too, is sometimes there's the exile top, you just have this turn to play it. Those can be really tough unless you played it the right way. This one gives you 1 more turn to make everything work out.
Yeah, I'm kind of stunned. I think that's an interesting choice. And not like condescending interesting. Just, I think, no, seriously, like, I think it's a great card. I think that one thing that I recommend if you're about to play this card, I think it's good no matter what, especially in sorcery decks or things that care about mill or things that care about direct damage or things that care about casting from exile, right? But I think that an added tip here would be to really know your playgroup if possible, or if not your playgroup, because maybe you're just going to local game store, you're meeting different people every time, or with different people on spell table every time. But to the extent you know your playgroup, or beyond that, know how people tend to interact if you have a certain deck and when it functions and how they treat it, right? Kind of where it fits into the larger metagame. Part of that's because of its Counselor's Dilemma card and, you know, the politics that Evan discussed that he kind of takes a shine to. With me, it's less about that. And with me, it's like, the way I think about this card is I think it is somewhat more predictable. You know, they talk about Fateful Tempest, right? Like some fates are written. I think that at different points in the game, the likelihood that different modes are chosen to different degrees, I think it's a little bit predictable, right? So I think to me, if I'm looking at the play groups from the people that I've played with, both locally and just, you know, randomly, I think that early game, most people are not going to want someone to have card advantage, even if it's impulse card advantage, because you could potentially, you know, if the golden ratio is, you know, one card, you have access to one card for every mana this is, very easy to get more than that if everyone chooses the mode where you're exiling cards for each present vote. I think most games, they're milling things early and taking the damage. So you'd want things that would either entice them not to do that because you have payoffs, or because you have those payoffs still, and now maybe it hasn't enticed them not to let you exile cards with the present vote, but now you're double dipping and getting added value for the fact that they chose damage. In late games, I think it's reversed, right? I think when that life total gets somewhere below 20, I think that, kind of like Evan was alluding to, now all of a sudden people are going to be more than happy to see you draw cards. Not happy, but at this point, life matters. And it's possible that people deviate from each other, or it's possible that they try to, like, you know, kind of commune together and like, okay, well, like, you'll take damage this time and then we'll do this, and it's limiting him, right? But I think for the most part, I would think of this as a card that, independent of the deck you're playing, right? And I think it's dependent on the deck you're playing, but I think putting that aside for a second, I think it's take damage early, let the player that plays Fateful Tempest draw late, and I think it's up to you to figure out, does my table think I'm one of the better Magic players? If my table thinks I'm one of the better Magic players, what I could see happening is that they're even more inclined to take the damage to stop you from drawing any cards and having any sort of resources. If you're someone that's newer to the table, or on top of that, maybe you're just having a losing position for that game, I could see them be like, oh, well, you know, like, let person X get back into the game, you know, like, let him exile his things, right? So I would be really just focused on the metagame of trying to read people and kind of read the dynamics with the deck you have in order to kind of like make an informed decision on exactly what Fateful Tempest is doing. Because all the modes are good, but again, Magic's a game that often is won or lost in the margins. We always say that, and information is kind of king. If you have the information to help you make accurate assessments about how your opponents are going to use Fateful Tempest, as opposed to, I'm just going to get one of two good modes, I think this card goes from good to great.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Jared. And I think we'd love to know in the comments, people that are using cards like this or exactly Fateful Tempest, and tell us if you're seeing that for your meta as well. Is it truly a dial that you see past start being the focus until a certain point, and then present is all that anybody can choose? And are you choosing specific commanders or strategies like is in the Lorehold commander deck, where whether it's exiled or milled, you've got some ability to grab those cards again? We'd love to hear about that, because I think this one's an interesting one that, hits in the right sorts of strategies and decks as well as the right metas. Okay, let's cover the last of our single colors before we get into the two-color combos, and that is green. And for me, I will say this green choice was really easy. As soon as I read this card, I said, oh my gosh, they've done it, and they've done it in green. And that is a creature known as Pest Rescuer. It is a 3 CMC creature, 2 and 1 green, 2/2. It's a Dryad Druid, but the main thing here is the ability that it has. So at the beginning of each upkeep, if you don't control a pest creature token, create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with, when this token dies, you gain 1 life. And then the other added bonus is if you would gain life, you gain that much life plus 1 instead. So, ladies and gentlemen, everybody, we've got Ophiomancer in green. And not only that, it's focused on the pests which means that the sacrificing, and these pests ultimately just being fodder means that you'll gain 2 life anytime it dies. So if you're looking for life gain, even if you're not doing the Golgari slash Witherbloom focus, having pests constantly is going to continue to give you that life. You may not care about the pests at all. You may just want to gain 1 extra life for each little increment of life that you get. And this just seemed like a really good card. If you're running any sort of token synergy, any sort of sacrifice synergy, you're going to be running straight to Pest Rescuer, definitely.
I think you chose a good one, man. I think Opiumancer was a good pick. It wasn't my pick, so we've got enough diversity for folks, but at the same time, each upkeep, I mean, I've been playing around with some decks now. I think everyone does it from time to time, right? And it really just, things that pump out bodies that you could just sack, repeatably. And I tried to even find things that come close to Opiumancer, right? Even in black, and there's reoccurring skeletons, and they're reprinting Nether Trader in the set, which is one of my favorite cards ever, right? But each upkeep is just such a clutch thing, and obviously, they did Pest in the life gain because that pairs pretty nice with life gain matters decks, and the new Dina deck out is it's something they're trying to promote, that you gain life, you lose life, you sack things, Witherbloom synergies. But yeah, I think each upkeep alone, I think it's a fantastic pick, Evan.
All right, so what did you choose, Jared? What's your green pick?
I actually also, no, I'm just kidding. No, here's what I did. I was between a few. I was less impressed with this overall, but honestly, this might be one where I own up to. I think, Evan, you might have outpicked me this time, right? I think maybe you gave a pretty good explanation of maybe why yours should have been a little higher than mine. So I'll tell you what I did. I wanted to give a shout out to a card I didn't pick first, which is Glorious Decay, because I think it's one of the best commons in the set. So especially in non-commander formats, look for this one, right? I think instant speed, graveyard hate is something that people are really sleeping on, because really, even something like a Bajuka Bog that will do it at sorcery speed, even though you're getting the whole graveyard, sometimes you don't have it when you really need it. You're being preemptive, but you're never going to have that perfect information set. There's nothing worse. And a lot of the times, you're not grabbing a whole graveyard from the grave to replay. I mean, there are cards even in this set that, enable that, spoiler alert, but was going to say that for the most part, you just really need to stop the one card that the person's going for, and they're only going for one card. So the fact that at 2 mana instant speed, you have exile a card from a graveyard and draw a card, and that's just one mode of something that could also deal 4 damage to a target creature with flying or destroy a target artifact. I think that is a slept-on common, but I'd be lying if I said that one of the best commons in this deck was better, or excuse me, one of the best green commons in this set is better than one of the best green. But it's Emeritus of Abundance, right? So again, I just spent the last half hour along with Evan kind of, being condescending to the Emeritus from this set. I'm about to swallow my own words, and I'm about to do the opposite. So Emeritus of Abundance is 2 mana, as well as a forest, so 3 total mana, and it is a creature elf druid. People care about druids, and people really care about elves, especially given the elven tribal support that, typal support that came out in Lorwyn Eclipsed. So that's exactly what the poor elf fanatic community needed. Another,
really, really good elf,
crazy powerful elf. But anyway, the card reads as having vigilance. This creature also enters prepared. So again, checking one of the boxes. And whenever this creature attacks, if you control 8 or more lands, I know 8's a lot. Reminder, you're in green. You're going to get 8 lands. This creature becomes prepared. So you get at least 1, and you'll probably get more. And the spell that's stapled onto it is Regrowth, which is 1 generic, 1 green, sorcery speed, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So in all the decks that they're promoting here where you're sacrificing things, you're going to have things in your decks you want to get back. Additionally, you're in green. There are going to be times where you're going to be using Harrow effects and putting lands in your graveyard. I think there's a really powerful green mana ramp piece in here that you're putting things in the graveyard, right? So the point is, target card doesn't have to be a land, but it could be a land, right? So, we talk about, Raiden probably being able to cast something the turn it comes out. There's nothing stopping you from playing this. And then you've got the one prepared slot already, using a regrowth, playing a land. And you could do that for 5 mana, and it essentially discounts itself for 4. So that's not a bad backup plan. And of course, if you've got something more powerful in your graveyard than a land, you could go for that too. I think the fact that the combined 3 mana of the creature plus the 2 mana of regrowth versus 6, I think for whatever reason, at least in my head, 5 mana and 6 mana just feel drastically different in the format right now. And I feel like you really could get that extra cast in and play something else. One, because it's 1 mana cheaper, and 2, I think I said this already, but I'm doing this on purpose. This is sarcasm right here, if you can't tell. You're in green. By the time it's turn 5 or 6, you should have 8 mana. You should have 9 mana. Oh, and if you're casting this on the curve, I think it's very possible that, if it's turn 2, turn 3, and you're casting your Emeritus of Abundance, for whatever reason, whether it's right or wrong, regrowth is inherently less scary than Demonic Tutor. Don't get me wrong, I get it to some extent, but for the most part, getting any card in your deck and any card in your grave, you're going to be putting good cards in your deck. You're going to be putting good cards in your graveyard. You're probably going to run this in some decks that, put things in your graveyard for you. I think the cards could be more comparable in terms of power, regrowth and Demonic Tutor, when you build your deck the right way to really maximize Emeritus of Abundance or regrowth effects. But it comes across as less scary, and I think it's going to be less of a target. And I think it's easier to make smart plays at an efficient mana level where you're not up a creek if you spend 6 mana on Emeritus of Woe in comparison to this. So I think this is probably my sleeper here. Or not even my sleeper here, but I do think that sometimes it's best to go with the obvious choice. And I think Emeritus of Abundance is a pretty obvious good card.
Yeah, that's a great pick, Jared. Regrowth is a really good spell. It's awesome to have it tied to a creature. There are a number of 8 land, with, and maybe we'll get into it with the 0 CMC choice, as far as the lands that talk about having 8 lands among the opponents. This one's you're trying to have 8 lands yourself. I wonder what the reasoning was behind 8 for folks. I wonder if it had any ties to the bracket system for Commander or anything like that. And they're just talking about you getting 8 out there. It's a high bar, but it's an achievable bar, as you're talking about, Jared. So good choice.
Yeah, while we're on it, I think the cards that we need to shout out, we haven't, there is that new set of lands that came out that are fetchable because they have the land types on them they come out untapped if there are 8 or more lands out on the field, right? So I don't know if they're trying to pair those. Again, 8 seems kind of generic, but from what I understood, it's that, most people were excited that they could play them turn 3 or turn 4, right? And that it seemed to favor players who were later in the turn cycle, which is kind of like a nice little way to catch up. So anyway, I think Wizards might just be thinking that 8 lands that someone by their 3rd turn will have ramped in a sufficient way, because in a 4-person game, someone's playing green, that green person's playing ramp spells like Farseeks and Cultivates, and that, this is basically in their minds, when this creature attacks by turn 3 or greater, prepare again. But maybe I'm off the mark there. Let us know what you think in the comments.
Okay, excellent, Jared. Okay, so that was it for WUBRG as far as the single colors. Now we go into the doubles, and what we're trying to make this a repeatable process. So we'll let you know that there were a number of color combinations that we don't get to talk on for this set. We may get to talk on them in future sets, but we'll make sure that that's highlighted. So if you're looking for any Azorius cards, white and blue, we'll let you know there are none here. So sorry, folks, nothing tied to Azorius here. But we will get into our first color, which is white-black, Orzhov, or as far as Strixhaven is concerned, that'll be Silverquill.
I think this was the card of the set, honestly, for me. So I'm excited to, start us off here. And I'm going to go with Fix What's Broken. It's a 4-mana card as an additional cost to cast this spell. Pay X life. It kind of pairs as like the antithesis of another card in this set that we might talk about later. And, you're paying the white-black 2 mana. It's a sorcery. We talked about how you have to, as an additional cost, cast a spell, pay X life. but then you get to return each artifact and each creature card with mana value X from your graveyard to the battlefield. So,
Wow.
Again, there have been things that have done this before, but I think never for both artifacts and creatures, right? So I have a buddy across the screen from me named Evan that you guys have met that is probably giddy to put this in a certain Urza deck. And then selfishly,
Yes.
I think that the different, sort of aristocrat decks are awesome. I've messed around with Von Dam. I've talked about Yashola, which I kind of run some aristocrat type theme where, things are blowing themselves up and coming back. And then one of my favorite decks is Rafine, which is a low to the ground deck with a bunch of cheap things trying to get through. And then I also messed around with Noctis, and I'll probably mess around with Master Splinter, right? As kind of ways to make my Yuriko deck a little less Yuriko-centric so people stop trying to use player removal on me, right? All this to say is that there's multiple ways to play in the white-black space here and have low-to-the-ground CMC creatures, right? So you could also do this with high mana things too. If you're running a reanimate deck and your entire plan is everyone's going to discard a card. The only difference is that they're discarding their least favorable card, and you're running Eldrazi's, right? And you're running, like 16 mana creatures and stuff, and you're bringing those back. And maybe you want to lose the life because you have a synergy there, but at the same time, you can, bring back these big boys and girls for pretty cheap, at least from a mana perspective, right? I mean, I think we talked about the Yashola thing, right? Again, Yashola's number 5, so not afraid to talk about a deck that people are using and that people are facing, right? Like, if you run this in Yashola, you can make X4, which means that in addition to the fact that by casting it with Yashola out, every opponent's taking 2 damage because you're casting a non-creature spell with CMC 3 or greater, and you're also gaining 2 life back, you can then pay 4 life on your own. So even though you've gained 2 life, the net is I've only lost 2 life this turn. By paying 4, you've still technically lost 4 life that turn. So you're triggering, independent of anything else that you play, you're triggering Yashola's players lost 4 or more life this turn, draw a card, right? So cool synergy there. And I think it's just a really good, because I think especially we talk about the curve moving down, I think that most decks, 2 or 3 mana is where to be. So whether it's bringing back all your 2 mana evasive things and getting every signet or, mana ramp piece or that's been dropped along the way, like your talisman, that's a good move. And I think that the 3 mana spot is pretty powerful too. I think if an opponent taps out and you have a fairly fair board, I think a lot of commanders are 3 mana these days, right? So if your commander's in the graveyard, you could elect to put it there, assuming that your opponents don't have any tricks they could pull to keep you jammed within the graveyard. You could bring your commander back as well as a bunch of other things. I think this is a great card, and I think that this has so many different sandboxes that this is going to belong to. Evan, what's your pick?
Yes, and Jared, I very much agree. This was also my number 1 pick for this color set. And so I'll say something that you implied, and I'll just sort of say it outright, is I very much think that a lot of players are looking at this card and adding on extra pips and colors. I think Esper, white, black, blue, Abzin, white, black, green are really going to be looking at this card saying, oh, finally, that this is really huge. And I think you're 100% hitting it on what X is likely to be. You may not be paying any more than 4 life to get really just everything that you've thrown into the graveyard already. So amazing card. It's really scary, and yeah, I think we're all watching for this one, definitely. Which means I need to go to my backup. And I went Elder Dragon on this one. So I'm looking at Silverquill, the Disputant. This is a 4/4 Elder Dragon, flying vigilance, and then each instant and sorcery spell you cast has casualty 1, which means as you cast a spell, you may sacrifice a creature with power 1 or greater, and when you do, copy the spell, and you may choose new targets for the copy. Goes a little hand in hand with Fix What's Broken. Really works well with the aristocrat strategy, throwing things into the graveyard. Now you've got that ability to copy instants and sorceries, which is really cool. Silverquill for this set really has a lot of focus on targeting creatures, putting +1/+1s, goading, and really just trying to work a lot of back and forth through your spells. And so I think Silverquill really puts it into overdrive with that copy ability, getting 2 triggers, 2 abilities off of whatever else you have in play. So that's my pick there. I don't think it beats Fix What's Broken, but I really am seeing those 2 cards be thrown into decks together at the same time.
I'm going to say that I concur. It does not beat Fix What's Broken, but it was my backup as well.
Amazing.
We'll keep it short and sweet for once. Let's move on.
Right. Okay. All right. Now we're into Lorehold, white-red, also Boros. So, Jared, I will say my Lorehold pick, my white-red pick was really easy for number 1. And so I apologize because I don't think anything came close to this in this color combination, and that's Lorehold Charm. That is a white-red instant with choose 1, so it's got some versatility to it. You're doing one of 3 things. Either each opponent sacrifices a non-token artifact of their choice, return target artifact or creature card with mana value 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, and potentially the one that you might choose every time if you're at that point of the game, which is creatures you control get +1/+1 and gain trample until end of turn. To see Overrun on a 2 CMC spell in these colors that may be really punchy, really trying to get lots of tokens out there, and then try to go wide, or you're putting +1/+1s onto something and really trying to get it through, seemed really powerful. There's a lot of versatility and options with those other 2 pieces, but once I got to that 3rd bullet, I knew this was going to be number 1.
That was my number 1, mostly for the 3rd bullet as well. I'll push back a little bit to keep things a little spicy and give us some backups that I think were close. I don't think it was above and beyond. I will say that more in general, like the first Lorehold commander deck from my recollection was something that really people were jumping about with excitement. There were some new cards here. I was mostly underwhelmed by the Boros, the red-white, or the Lorehold cards here. I think Lorehold in general is a cool concept. You know, the professor, not to name drop other content creators, put out a pretty interesting video talking about mostly Silverquill this time and Lorehold previously as things that succeeded in a way the other 3 color pairs for the Strixhaven houses did not, in terms of really reinventing preconceived notions about the colors and the metas that come with those color sets. But this time around, I do think that it kind of missed the mark. But with that being said, I don't think that these were alone in terms of the only good cards in the set. I think that there's a lot of decks that are going to see Aziza Mage Tower Captain get played, which is whenever you cast an instant. Sorry, it's a 2-mana creature, which is going to get played, right? Red, white. It's a Djinn Sorcerer, right? So one of the new Sorcerer cards. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, you may tap 3 untapped creatures you control. If you do copy that spell, you may choose new targets for the copy. I think there's a lot in white and red where it's like it's either spell sling or it's spell sling adjacent with an added focus on token generation where it's a go wide token deck, right? I think that, you know, some decks might see this include Feather, right? I think that some decks that might include this are, you know, Narset Lane Exile, or really any of the Narsets that we talked about. I think Tidecaller, you know, the one that creates birds every time you cast a non-creature spell that also taps for mana, like I think, or excuse me, creates, you know, spirits or whatever that tap for mana. I think that there's enough red-white instant sorcery go wide synergies where we're going to see Aziza. Again, I think we're going to see more Lorehold, but we're going to see Aziza. I think that personally, I'm excited about Chiral history buff. See, when we talked about how we might mispronounce words, you didn't think we'd screw up history, did you? But we're trying to excite on this channel. But anyway, I was going to say that Chiril's an interesting one because it's another just red-white that it has whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, it becomes prepared, so fairly easy to do. And then it's got mill a card, put 2/1/1 counters on target creature, gains trample till end of turn. So a lot of these white-red Spellslinger adjacent decks are trying to like buff up things. A lot of these cards have prowess or even double strike. But what they don't really have is a consistent way to penetrate and do the damage. Now, if they have blue in them, like, you know, Narset Lane Exile, then you could cast things that, you know, give them either shadow or make them unblockable for a term. There's a lot of 1-mana or 2-mana cantrips that do things just like that when you go blue. But especially in white-red, it's a little tougher, and the amount you can rely on unblockable and a true evasion versus trample really declines, right? So the fact is, like, you know, in a lot of these decks, it's a synergy between punching up your creatures using spells. So the fact that you can have these things that do exiles, right? We talked about cards that do that already, but it's like you create the exiles, which is getting easier and easier to do, and then you have a spell, and then you're able to hit with your commander. And if your commander's able to hit, at least in the case of, I mentioned Narset and Light and Exile just because it's one that I think works really well here. Like, you're able to basically kind of like the matches are lighting themselves essentially, because as long as Narset and Light and Exile can attack, things are leaving the graveyard. And as long as things are leaving the graveyard, Carol's prepared, and it's going to give Narset a way to attack. So anyway, just a little cool synergy there. And then I think the last one that I think we'll see, or I honestly don't know if we'll see, really curious in the comments section, but we had to bring it up, right, is Suspend Aggression. I've seen a lot of talk on this because it's essentially for 3 mana at instant speed, an exile target non-land permanent in the top card of your library. So for each of those cards, its owner may play it next turn until the end of their next turn. So basically, you're kind of like forcing your opponent to waste resources redeploying something or risk losing it essentially forever to exile, while at the same time, you're creating some pseudo card advantage via impulse draw for yourself. So I've seen people like high on that card. I'm personally not, because I just think that like I don't run any white-red decks on myself. I think that white already has a suite of more powerful removal spells. And I honestly think draw on both colors, especially when you factor in impulse draw, is getting better, as well as some colorless things that you could also do there. So like to me, it's like I think the ability to like throw some pseudo draw onto the removal is really the appeal here. But in terms of the exile non-land permanent, there's better you could do with having access to white and red for 3 mana, in my opinion. So to me, that's lower on the list. I think Evan knocked it out of the park, but I had to say that, hey, it's not just that one card in this set. Had to keep it spicy.
Okay, I like it, Jared. My backup was Aziza, Mage Tower Captains. I totally agree with that one. I think that one's really good. I could definitely see it in the command zone for those go wides. Yeah, you got to meet certain criteria and conditions, and then you should be in a good spot. Also, fun art. I think that'll be a fun one for folks to cosplay as. I'm excited to see that green hair and, really push the fitness angle as well. Get those muscles going. Okay. All right. So now I'm set for Prismari or blue-red. It does mean that there was no white-green and there was no blue-black. So Dimir, Selesnya, sorry, folks, you weren't in Strixhaven this time.
I think I'm going to call a last-second audible, and I'm going to make my backup my choice over my other one. So
okay.
I'm curious what you name, so I'm not going to say what my initial primary is. And I'm going to say that my backup that I'm now, it's getting a promotion, is Sanar, Unfinished Genius. We saw this guy for the first time, at least to my knowledge, in Lorehold, where he was doing multicolor matter stuff, which is very near and dear to my heart. You guys might learn about that more soon in a Commander Compatibility episode coming out soon. But here he's just an unfinished genius, just one of those unfinished geniuses. Here's what you have to know about the card in this set. He is blue and a red, so just a 2-drop, for a 0/4 legendary creature goblin sorcerer. Again, you'll notice the theme with every single prepared card we're choosing is it starts with Sanar, enters prepared. Kind of need to see that to be good. But the great thing about Sanar Unfinished Genius is really his activated ability, because he can tap to create a treasure token that you can activate only if you've cast an instant or sorcery this turn. In the decks playing Sanar Unfinished Genius, I hope to only see them in instant or sorcery matters, unless you're my opponent, in which case please play this in an unoptimized deck. But with that being said, I think in the Spellslinger decks, you essentially have a reliable mana dork that can tap for mana of any color in the form of creating this treasure token, right? It's going to be really nice with things that, create mana every time you cast a spell. There are a couple of cards that do that. Like a certain dwarf shaman, if I'm not mistaken. I might be comparing to. I mean, you'll get the name of this card. I believe in you. But yeah, my point is this slots in very nicely to those. And then why are we preparing this card? Because for 5 mana, you can cast Wild Idea, which is search your library for an instant or sorcery card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Now, there are cheaper versions of cards that can do this effect. So this time, kind of with some of the other cards we're saying, but maybe more literally and more visibly here, you really are paying a premium on the mana cost to get the repeatability of the effect. A lot of the cards that searching for libraries and instance sorceries, right? Like some of them are tutors, but they put it on top of your deck, or they only focus on one versus the other between instant or sorcery, right? There's that new blue-black MDFC where you get something back from your graveyard, but you got to pay 4 mana just to even bring it back from your graveyard first. So here you're paying 5 mana, but you get to repeat it. The thing that clinches this and makes this good in just about every deck is the fact that it enters prepared and that you're essentially generating mana, and that it's a 2 mana drop, right? So essentially what you can do is not much the turn it comes out, but hypothetically, I think on this one, maybe you don't do the tutor thing right away. Maybe you kind of play it as a 2-drop and see if your opponent wastes premium removal, because if they're getting rid of your 2-drop, then it's essentially already done work for you, right? Because then the next turn it can tap, right? And then you start to have ideas of things that you could play with, right? Because once you cast an instant or sorcery, even if people try to like counter it or blow it up in response to it, then you can tap it immediately. So that next turn, you can actually cast a wild idea if no one's gone for it first. And then if they try to blow it up in response to you casting a wild idea, then you tap and you've discounted it already, and opponents have wasted removal. So you've essentially turned a 5 mana turn, or we could call it 7, right? Because you are paying for Unfinished Genius too. So it's 7 total mana, but you're getting a discount of 1 because you're creating the treasure token. And then your opponent's wasting a good card. So let's say it's a Swords of Plowshares. It's still, they lost one of their most valuable cards, and it really is only a net 5 mana swing. And that's in the worst absolute case. More often than not, you're going to be getting at least one instant or sorcery, be able to play them. I think the good thing is that the decks that are going to want to run this are going to be big on cantrips, and they're going to be big on things that you are going to be able to play that turn. This isn't like something where you're looking for like a 7 mana board wipe, for example, with your 5 mana tutor effect, right? So I think that the wild idea, like the 5 mana cost, is intimidating, but I think that this is actually more efficient than you think. And I think that it's either going to be a sleeper, but I think it's very easy to mitigate the risk to overexerting yourself on the mana front, because you can kind of do this in bursts and be very strategic and selective about how much mana you're spending, when and why. So
that's awesome, Jared. So Sanar was also my second choice. So I think that's a great pick. You and I are not sleeping on it, so we'll see if other folks miss it, just because there's a lot of strange text, and right, folks may see that high mana cost on the prepared spell and think that they're just never going to hit it. But I'm very much with you. Casting instants and sorceries, get all those treasures, and I'm totally following you. I think that's really smart as far as being able to get that treasure sort of on the way out, or via counter or what have you. Lots of times and lots of opportunities to tap. And I would say if you're putting Sanar in the command zone, you're probably trying to do some untappy sort of things as well. So, Sanar, excellent choice. And so what you may have saved then for me, Jared, as the first choice, and what I think is the number one, is the Resonating Lute. This one also, it took me a moment to read through it and totally understand it. So this is an artifact. It is 4 total, CMC 2, and then blue and red. Lands you control have tap, add 2 mana of any one color. Spend this mana only to cast instant and sorcery spells. And then it's got tap, draw a card, activate only if you have 7 or more cards in your hand. So the second part, the draw a card, if you've got 7 or more cards in hand, that one fits a specific play style. That, both of these I think fit specific play styles. They may not always mesh, but I do think that if you're hitting one of the criteria regularly for your strategy, it's probably going to be a good card to have. For me, it's usually the spell slinging part. So getting 2 mana from each of those lands, sort of doing a Mirari's Wake in some case for these colors, I think is really cool. So that's my pick for number one.
Yeah, no, the interesting thing about the Lute, right, just for a second, is like there's only so many cards like that a deck can run to still operate. Now, I think that we're getting to the point where, and again, like we talk about just like time evolving. Let's not beat around the bush. Like, people know what we're talking about here. We've got like we've got an observant base here, right? For as much as people talk about this set evolving, it's all Modern Horizons 3, right? It's all the MDFCs. And when people say like, oh, like there's more choice than ever, there's true, but we're talking about these MDFCs where we're talking about how like, it's now possible to run a couple of splashy things and still hit your 30, 35 of the core of what your deck is trying to do, of whatever quantity. I mean, that's the quantity of whatever you're trying to do. If it's death triggers or creatures that are recurable that can then die for you, it's 30, 35, give or take, right? If it's an instant or sorcery deck, you probably want to be running 30, 40 spells on the low end, right? Like, but the thing is, it used to be, right? Like, what is my big, splashy, I'm going to get you instant or sorcery payoff machine, right? Is it Thousand Year Storm? Is it Niv Mizzet Perun? Is it something else? Is it one of the new ones that creates like the 5/5 dragons? But you don't get one, you get more than one, but it used to be not much more than one. And I think the same is true on the setup piece. You get a little more because lower mana value, right? But it's like, I think of the Lute, and I think of like, cards like Elementalist Palette, right? Or I think of these things that are like, this is a not instant, not sorcery that cares about generating instants or sorceries, and you've got room for a few of them, but you're really going to prioritize the best ones to be different for different people. But it's not like there are 10 of these cards that are good and fit this void. I'm going to run all 10 of them or even 8. Now you can start to run more. So, I mean, I think that was kind of the hold up there. This might be one of the better ones, even for that first ability alone, right? So I see where you're coming from this, but it's just interesting, and it just kind of shows where the game is going with the modality of a lot of these cards. Again, we talk modality, we talked about the MDFCs, but charms in general, like we just got another charm cycle, like Evan was talking about Lorehold charm, right? Like it's all of these things are adding flexibility. We got that land that we talked about that neutralizes other utility lands, right? Like there's more slots in the deck for these sort of fun things, because things like your lands are now kind of like doing double duty more and more. So I think it's an interesting pick.
Thank you, Jared. Yeah, and I'm totally with you on that. If you're doing Spellslinger, you do have to decide how many of those non-sorcery or instants you're actually putting in there. And so you do have to decide what the payoffs are. I think Resonating Lute hits it. For 4, you really have to decide, but getting double your mana, essentially, off your lands, if you are going land heavy, I think is a real win. Okay. Now we are off to blue-green, Simic, or Quandrix for Strixhaven. And so I'll say, for me, on the Simic side, blue-green, this was a really easy choice. I think there are a lot of good cards in here. I will say, for our criteria, it was really tough to note some of the X spells. So I will say this card is not an X spell. There may be some of those X spells that folks feel are better, and we'll get to talk on some of those later on. This one felt like an easy instant slam into all Simic decks, or all decks that have blue and green, and that is Tam, Observant Sequencer. This one just felt like one of those cards that you just hit the effects so easily. Landfall. Let me go through it. So for 4 total CMC, 2 green and blue, you get a legendary creature, Gorgon Wizard. It's 4/3 and has a landfall ability, which is whenever a land you control enters, Tam becomes prepared. And then the prepared spell is Deep Insight. It's a sorcery, blue and a green. You draw a card and you gain 1 life. So to some extent, for 6, and you've got to get that land in after Tam is in there, then you get to draw a card and gain a life. But the big thing here is you're just getting that payoff off of just trying to play the game and get your lands down. You're gaining that life, which may at some points seem inconsequential, but you're doing this 4 or 5 times potentially. You're drawing a lot of cards. You're gaining a lot of life. And if you're able to play, if you're able to make this sorcery instead an instant, you're drawing a lot of cards. You're gaining a lot of life. Maybe you're playing a lot of your lands and your ramp spells on other people's turns, and you're just really stacking it all on top. If this is your commander, that's definitely what you would try to do. But if not, then just getting that landfall triggered, getting an extra card and an extra life, just really lets you get to do the rest of whatever you want to do with Tam and with your deck in general.
This time I think I am going to respectfully challenge you and take some pride in myself and say, yes, I think my number one is better than your number one.
Okay.
I'm also going to go the extra step and say that I think Tam would have been number 3 or 4 for me. Okay. I don't think it would have been number 2. I think the thing I like about Tam is that Tam is just awesome. I'm biased as hell because you guys are going to see in, again, upcoming videos that I really like the multicolor stuff. So Tam Mindful First Year I think Mindful First Year is one of my favorite cards now for being able to turn on multicolor synergies and also give things hexproof for those synergies. For this one, it's good because you can do it incrementally. But it's also like, hypothetically, like another way to look at this card is you got to pay 6 to basically play it and get the ability. I think it's easy to turn on, but it's like let's say that you activate the ability 3 times, right? Would you pay 10 mana for something where it's a 4/3 creature, ignore the landfall side of the house, right? And it's just, because I agree, it's easy to turn on the ability, right? But like, pay 10 mana, 4/3 body, draw 3 cards, gain 3 life. It's good, and it's good like an incremental nothing to do thing, but I don't know. I don't know if it's let us know in the comments if you think that this is the home run that Evan thinks it is, that I want it to be, because I'm Team Tam, but I'm a little bit more skeptical.
In those colors, you may find many different. Exactly, you're trying to draw cards. You got plenty of things that can do that. It was just something that I was like, oh man, turn 2 on this. You can do deep sight twice, draw 2 cards. Again, if you really want the lands, if you really want the cards, that sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting how we're playing this, right? Because sometimes we've been joined at the hip, but here I'm expressing some healthy skepticism in what you did, and I'm about to nominate a X-Spell, which you expressed, and I think rightfully so, some healthy X-Spell or skepticism, right? So I actually went with Mind into Matter, which, if I'm reading this card right, it is a 2-drop. Make sure it's new to this set. I'm not going crazy. Yep, it's Secrets of Strixhaven, right? And it's not just like a commander one, and it's draw X cards. Then you may put a permanent card with mana value X or less from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So I think everything that we've talked about with previous cards in terms of X not needing to me this crazy high cost, I think that's part of it. But I think that the big problem with X spells, right? In addition to what Evan was saying about like, where do you even quantify an X spell on a chart in terms of CMC? But I think you kind of like we talked about knowing your meta in the past with like some of the cards like the council card. I think here you kind of have to know your deck too, and you slot the cards whether you're using Moxfield or Archidec. No, we're not sponsored. I'm just naming them. Someone should sponsor us. But I was going to say that like no matter how you're organizing your deck, right? Like I think when you have an X spell on there, you should have 1 or 2 mana values where you're like, okay, this is where it really slots in. Mm-hmm. I think same with Affinity. I think same with anything where you've got an alternative casting cost or an extra casting cost beyond the non-X mana. So anyway, that's one of the problems. So I understand the skepticism. With that being said, I think the big problem with X spells is that you're basically passing your turn in many cases to play them. And I think that's especially true with big damage bursters, but sometimes like that's all you need to do, and you have things on the field ready to generate that value for you. But the other category, other than the big mana like burn spells, is draw spells. With big draw spells that are X in nature, a lot of the times you're tapping out to make X as high as possible to draw as many cards as possible, right? And you're drawing an exorbitant number of extra cards, but you're essentially sacrificing a turn for card advantage while also making yourself a target because everyone's like noticing the fact that maybe someone who wasn't a target now has 7 unique ways to challenge their lead on the game, right? Or make a comeback or put it away, right? Mind over matter, Quandrix, solving problems. So I think it's really creative designing, right? Because it's solving this problem by letting you have your cake and eat it too, right? You're putting a permanent onto the field, the turn you're drawing, making it somewhat similar to like, it's not quite the same, and I'm not saying it is, right? But something similar to like a Rishkar's expertise where you get select advantages and disadvantages from Rishkar's, but at the end of the day, you are tangibly progressing your board state forward while also giving yourself the card advantage to get ready to set up to do the next thing. And again, this is sequenced in the right order you'd want to, because it's not even like you need something in your hand ready to go to be like, okay, this is what I'm going to play, and then I'll have some cards for figure out what I'm going to do next. That's the ideal spot to cast, in my opinion. But I think you also need the flexibility of, hey, I have 3 cards in my hand. One of them would be a good thing where it wouldn't be the ideal turn, but if that's all I did this turn, then I'm okay. I'm resigned to that. But you can make that ultimate decision after you draw an extra 4 or 5 or 6 cards, whatever your X is, and have the flexibility to kind of pivot on the fly and be like, something I drew is better than the permanent that I was going to place on the field. So again, I think it's a good way to like make sure that you're in the game while you're setting up for your next big thing.
Yep, that's a great pick, Jared. And I think that's totally true with the X spells. You really have to know your deck for that one where you're doing some searching, and you really got to feel comfortable with a couple different values for X and know that know what X is to some extent prior to seeing it be pooled, seeing it be drawn. All right, so sorry, Rakdos fans, there's no black-red as far as what we've seen. Rakdos, not a special secret school for Strixhaven, so we'll jump on into black-green, Witherbloom, or Golgari for some folks. Okay, so this is good bookends for me. My black-green spell is Vicious Rivalry. So we started the dual pairs with Fix What's Broken. This is the opposite side to some extent. That is the start of it all. So this is a 4 CMC sorcery, 2 black and green. As an additional cost to cast a spell, pay X life. Destroy all artifacts and creatures with mana value X or less. So it's really awesome seeing that mana value X or less piece. Sometimes with something like Toxic Deluge, where you pay an X to deal that much damage, folks that have gone big and tall may demand that you pay 13 life or something to take down that biggest creature. So to some extent, you're likely paying for mana, paying for life to destroy all that you need to. And you can play a little bit now, add this to your black-green and have really big spells, so you don't have to worry about those ones. There's, some ways you can sort of fix it with the meta. But ultimately, there's a pretty solid wipe, and I see it really as an instant include for anybody playing these colors.
I think that the perfect way to end it, man. I had the same card. I was going to say that everything that you said about it being really the foil to Fix What's Broken is true. I think another way to think about it, similarly to how we characterized Erode as a third Swords to Plowshares Path to Exile piece, is this, in some respects, not better in some ways, worse in the other ways, but it's also a second copy of Toxic Deluge in the colors that can also afford to play green, right? So, it's like Game Over. It's like Withering Curse, which we talked about. It's challenging, kind of the best black board wipe, but, when you have access to green too. So it's, again, here's a 4-drop. You can run it. It's, the X spell is everything that Evan was mentioning. And I think that, it's worse than Deluge because it costs an extra mana and you need green for it. It's worse than Deluge because it's a destroy, not a minus. But it also lets you get at artifacts on the same time. So again, to me, it's like if you're running Golgari, odds are, if you're running Golgari and you're running Deluge, odds are you're running both of these cards. So anyway, I think it's a great pick.
Hey, Jared, I'll actually add that I think that artifacts piece is really important. You do have to worry and watch out for yourself on that. Oops, you just destroyed your soul rings and your signets and things like that. If you're in these colors, you may be land-centric and not really worried about those artifacts. But your artifacts may also be what you're using for your sack outlets and things like that. So do recognize that this wipe is taking out your artifacts. You may be smacking everybody else's soul rings off the table, and you got to know what comes back after you take out those mana rocks.
In public service announcement, if you're running the black, red, green combination, Riveteers, if you're familiar with that from, previous sets, I shouldn't need to give you a plug to take out Decimate. But this is a plug to take out Decimate. Yeah, you're losing the ability to kind of go for certain things like enchantments too. But the all versus the targeting thing matters, and the non-bow of Decimate, because there's a bunch of the things that you want to target on the field, but it's not every single type. Maybe there's not an enchantment on the field, and now you can't get at those enchantments. You don't have to worry about that with Vicious Rivalry. So again, to me, we talk about how it factors into some of the better cards, but Toxic Deluge, but also think about the cards that you shouldn't be playing that 4 mana for Vicious Rivalry. You probably want to do that.
All right, Jared. So what's the number 2 for you for the School of Witherbloom?
Number 2 was pretty generic, my friend, but I did go with Witherbloom the Balancer. I've seen people that are really high on this card and talking about how this might be the best commander in the set. I personally disagree. We'll get into that later. But with that being said, that affinity for creatures ability makes the 8 mana pretty non-playable, because if you're running black-green, you're running recursion, and also, maybe you're running things like the new card that Evan talked about that generates Pest every upkeep, right? Like there are plenty of ways to spam board in green, whether it's going big and doing things like Goreclaw and getting out a bunch of creatures by doing big things matter synergies, and then you're just getting things out mana efficient, whether it's running all of these ramp pieces that we talked about, like ramp spells in particular in the green color sets, right? It's not, you're not paying 8 mana for this. I think if you're paying more than 4 mana for this, I think that's a good barometer of whether or not it should even go in the deck, right? But if you're running things where you could get creatures out, this essentially unlocks a new archetype for green-black synergies, right? There have been things where, tangentially, you've cared about instants and sorcery spells in Golgari, Witherbloom colors before, but this is just such a unique build around, right? Because it's, we talked about how, like, in response to some of these other colors, how, like, the synergies between, like, white and red, and, in a lot of cases, white, red, blue, were, like, instant spells that generate tokens, you can do that in green and black now. You can kind of create, like, an instant sorcery army there and do some really unique and exciting builds. So, again, I don't think it's quite as versatile as some of the other cards, like, Witherbloom Charm, I thought was interesting too. But I think it was Vicious Rivalry #1. I think the only other card that comes close to Vicious Rivalry, in addition to the one that I just said, is I think that new commander. I think he's a close third. I'm just going to read him real quick because we've mentioned him, but he's a 4 mana planeswalker with he comes out with 5 loyalty, which is pretty good. His +2 is you gain 3 life. He's got a 0 draw a card and lose a life, which is pretty good for a 0 effect. He's got a -3 destroy target creature, so it's one of those where you pay 4, and if this reads pay 4, destroy target creature, avoid 1 or 2 attacks next turn, because now your opponents are going for this as opposed to your life total, right? Like, I think that's already, like, on par with its mana cost. But also, if you could get it to its -6 ability, so again, it just needs a -6. It's got a +2 ability, so you can even take a hit of penetrating trample damage. And you could get this emblem for -6, where whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. I had this lower on the list than the other two because I feel like it's a little bit more niche of a card that requires some build around to put it in your 99. But I think those are the only 2 things close. But I think you hit it out of the park with Vicious Rivalry, man.
Yeah, it's wild to see that emblem. They're definitely getting on some of that Aristocrats. Sephiroth had that same sort of deal to try to get that emblem on there. It's wild to have something that no one can really interact with. So if you're able to get to that ability, people better watch out. Okay, so as far as color combinations, we've got no red-green, and that's actually it for the top half of our list. As far as we've seen with this set, and maybe there are surprises later on, but we think we're hitting this at a good time. No 3-color, no 4-color, no 5-color cards. I will say, personally, once I saw with the story and that talk about students getting at least 1 year or up to 1 year in different schools, I was thinking that maybe there was going to be some ability for 3 or 4-color cards. And maybe they'll save that for later on. That's totally fine. But I'll say, as far as the set was concerned, we've not seen any of that. So we are jumping into the later half, which is going to be us focusing on starting with 0 CMC or converted mana cost. What's the best card at that level? And go as high up as the set allows. But before then, we'll do a quick ad break. So we'll see you on the other side of that.
And now a word about our sponsors. Magic the Gathering is enjoyed best when it feels like a fun game and not an overtax on your mental capacity. Getting to the table already stressed and uncomfortable only increases when you are not treating your body right. Deemed Fit is an activewear and athleisure brand dedicated to creating clothing to support your fitness and mental goals, all the while supporting first responders, service members, community providers, and veterans, and promoting mental well-being. Are you ready to get into the best physical and mental shape possible this year? Use the link in the description or at checkout use code SPELLTABLE to get 15% off. Again, that's code SPELLTABLE to get 15% off. Try Deemed Fit today. Playing a long game of Magic the Gathering can be tiring. Not to mention the fun, but exhausting days at a con or at your local game store, going from event to event and table to table. One of the best ways to continue in stride is with Dubby. Dubby is an energy drink brand with a single goal. Make an energy drink that is jitter-free, crash-free, with no sugars, artificial colors and dyes, and 0 calories. Dubby has energy drink blends, caffeine-free, electrolyte-focused hydration blends, and other items meant to keep you at your peak. Use the link in the description or at checkout, use code SPELLTABLE to get 10% off. Again, that's code SPELLTABLE to get 10% off. Try Dubby today.
All right, folks, well, you've made it to the second half of our list. You've also made it past the ads, but surprise, there's a secret ad here, sort of. So I just wanted to highlight that Spell Table Showcase MTG is the holder of the Underworld coupon book. For better or worse, we've scoured the internet. We love making content, and we've seen a lot of awesome content creators out there. They're getting sponsorships. We've got some sponsorships. We wanted to put that all into one spot so that ultimately, with the big goal of this channel saving folks money, you can use that coupon book. You can go to your favorite stores, a lot of them, and the big focus here being Magic the Gathering products. You can go to those places, use those coupon codes, get your products, save a little money, and then let your dollar go forward and go further. Okay, with that out of the way, Jared, we are at the 0 CMC. What? You already talked some on land, so I'm excited to see if you've got something else up your sleeve. 0 CMC, what is the number one card, or cards potentially, if you're talking on cycles, that you've seen from the set?
Nothing up my sleeve, my friend. If you're at that 0 CMC spot, it better be good. It's Petrified Hamlet.
Okay, anything more that you want to say on it?
Not that we haven't already touched. Again, I just can't stress enough how, you're seeing two weird kind of phenomenons with Magic happening at the same time, at least in terms of the 2-3 bracket commanders, right? You're seeing what we talked about already, cards doing more and more, lands doing more than more. And you're also, creating space for non-lands. And you're seeing this at the same time that people are also pushing to include more and more lands in decks, right? The days, and maybe this will change and maybe this will seesaw too, right? But despite everything, missing a land drop has become as crucial as ever. So, what used to be pushes for 34, 35, 36 are now 37, 38, 39. I think some of that's overstated. That's just me personally. We have friends, and Evan's smiling already, that would disagree with us 100%. Right? But the point is, you've got 38 lanes to go with, more if you're running a landfall deck, less if you're running something like a Euroko deck where the game is going to be over by the time, if people have 8 mana and you've got 2, you've already lost. So maybe you do things a little differently in those situations. I recognize fringe cases, believe me, I've seen and played against and have, operationalized both sides of that. But that being said, because you're seeing these competing dynamics of have cards do more things to free up non-land spaces while also running more lands, Petrified Hamlet is key. Utility lands are getting more and more powerful, like Evan talked about, and having one of those lands that you want to do something meaningful, like check your box for targeted land. I'm not going to call it destruction, but essentially, I would not be expecting in most circles people to interact with your utility land that turns off another utility land, short of them running mass land disruption. So maybe it's different in bracket 4 and 5. If you play more 4 and 5 than 3 and 2, let us know in the comments section. I'm genuinely curious. But for the most part, you have a safe way to stop something like, the lands that Evan was talking about that lets you regenerate zombies or regenerate spiders or, tap for 1 billion colors of mana. You could turn off people's entire play patterns, or at the very least, you could stop them from blowing things up. I think certain things are meaner than other things that you could do when it comes to this card, right? Like, I think that blowing up a regenerating land, I don't want to throw anyone under the bus like Evan, but Evan runs Shelob. When he's got the land out that lets him regenerate Shelob, my day at the office gets a lot longer. I don't think it's wrong to run Petrified Hamlet there. Just like I know if he had a Petrified Hamlet and I was playing my old Verena deck, which was Zombies Matter, he would do it to me, and I would probably make a grimace, but I would totally understand why he's doing it. One card comes to mind. You know what I'm talking about. It's Maze of Ith. Maze of Ith gets people out of so many games. It's such a controversial card in terms of like most people seem to have the impression of, oh, like you're complaining that your opponent's running a Maze of Ith. My response is get good skill issue, right? Like, you know, a lot of people seem to have that like old school mentality. I don't know. Like I kind of like sympathize with the people that feel a little bit of salt with that card, right? And even if there's a salt matter or not, it's just a good card. So one of the ways you beat an opponent when they play a good card is you stop them from playing the good card. This does that. So I think for that reason alone, 0, man. I mean, I think I might like this in some cases, man. I think in some cases I like this more than a Strip Mind. So, yeah.
Well, speaking on salt, sorry for finally making Swarmyard something exciting for anything outside of rats. And then on that, yeah, when I saw the Hamlet, I thought, great, they're coming after my Swarmyard in Rogue's Passage. Hamlet names a card. You say Swarmyard, and doesn't matter that I have it or don't have it, or my other players have it. It just negates all Swarmyard abilities.
Go for the Maze of Ith, guys. Punish the Maze of Ith players.
That's right.
You don't get to hide behind one land.
Excellent choice, Jared. We talked a little bit about the Turbulent lands already. That's my number 1 pick. I think those are really exciting. I think the number's really interesting. It's definitely for Commander, and it's awesome that they're fetchable.
There was another colorless land, not Hamlet, that I thought I preferred to Study Hall.
The Biblioplex?
Yes, it was Great Hall of the Biblioplex. I think that card is fantastic because there's so many decks where it's instant and sorceries matter. So the ability, even just alone, to like hurt yourself for 1 mana to be able to play those runny colors, I think it's pretty good and pretty interesting and noteworthy. I think, you know, it's a little different in the sense where, you know, for the longest time, I feel like red-blue kind of dominated that space. Mm-hmm. So in a 2-color deck, you don't really need Biblioplex. I'm a little biased because, like, you know, I think that Wizard Matter Spellslingers are kind of a cool combination, right? Or even if it's not like a true Spellslinger, something like a Yashola, the ability for it to become a wizard is something that's going to matter for 5 mana, like 0% of the time, unless you're running like, you know, something like a Nala in the command zone. But with that being said, like, I think the second you get to 3 colors, which is something that they're trying to do more and more, I think Yashola is kind of proof of that. And I also think that now that, you know, this set has really tried to make 5 different color pairs. So 4 color pairs beyond blue-red. Pairs that care about instant sorceries matter because we've seen support for that in white-black and black-green and blue-green all in the same set, right? Like, you know, this card could matter. I'm curious what thoughts are in the comment section on how necessary is it to make sure that you have the mana support beyond just commons. Like where are we going to be seeing this beyond 2-color deck pairings, and what 2-color deck pairings really need this?
Don't miss out on these lands.
Because I'm getting Biblioplex, but yeah.
Okay, we are talking the 1 CMC cards, and I actually have a number 1. I'm gonna be brave that I think is better than Erode, and I'm gonna really try. I'm gonna really try to argument as to why. Okay, so the card is Fractalize, and it's an X spell, but it's X in blue. So and so the argument that I'm going to say is that technically you can make X 0 and pay just a blue. So let me read it. So it's an instant. Until end of turn, target creature becomes a green and blue fractal with base power and toughness, each equal to X plus 1. So the way I've been thinking about it, and you tell me if this is totally wrong, there's an offensive and a defensive way to do this. Offensively, you make X as high as you can and pay that blue, and then you turn a creature that you've got that's attacking, you wipe away its power and make it something really big. Totally get that. The argument that I'm attempting to make is as a defense, you pay just the 1 blue and something that's coming at you, a Voltron, something really crazy. I mean, Voltron depend the swords and stuff. Some of those things may have plus abilities on it that make it tough. But some of those things that just have big base power and toughness, I'm thinking some of those cards that get stronger for everything in the graveyard, what have you. Instead, you turn it into a green and blue fractal with base power and toughness equal to 0+1, which is a 1/1. If you're really mean and you've got a Maha, it's Feathers Knight, and you're destroying all those 1/1s, then that'd be really sweet to take out that creature. Anyway, this is my way of attempting to say Fractalize as just a 1 blue means hopefully turn a creature into a 1/1 for the turn. And wipe away, instant semi-fog for one creature. So that's the attempt I'm trying to make here. You can totally tell me that it's not as good as Erode, which is totally fine.
It's not as good as Erode.
I did want to point out this secret 1 CMC spell. Jared, tell me all the ways in which I'm wrong, and tell me about your 1 CMC if you've got anything different than Erode or Fractalize.
It's Erode. It's Erode. It's not different than Erode because it's Erode. I mean, I don't know that. Like, so I think I'm reading the card right, and I understand what you're saying, and I think you're right in terms of like, yes, technically offensive and defensive purposes, right? Like if I have, you're at 15 commander damage. But no worries, because even though you don't have flyers, like you've got one more turn because my commander's only at 3/3, and all of a sudden, like it's 6/6, and now all of a sudden that's game because I've pumped this for 3. So offensive, and then defensive. If I'm understanding this right, like you're turning things essentially into 1/1s, like the lowest you could go is a 1/1. Okay,
That's
right. So like to me, jack of all trades, master of none. There are better ways to pump creatures offensively. I understand versatility and. How dare you use versatility and modality, my favorite thing in the world, against me to win an argument? That's not like you at all, Evan. Purple. But was going to say that, like, all right, well, what if the creature is a beast? Hey, in order to stop you from having to edit and pull something that you don't already pull, what if the creature is Y'shtola, right? The threat isn't it attacking. The threat is its ability. This doesn't turn the ability off, right? So you can still win the game like that. And then for you to destroy the thing, you either need like another wipe, like maybe like a Withering Curse type thing, right? Where it's like you make the thing all 1 power, 1 toughness, and then you just need the -2 and it's gone. Or you need something else, right? Because it's got to be that, or you got to at least go to combat, right? And again, instant combat trick for that versatility. I will give you the versatility, right? But want to know what's nice? Not having to go to combat, not having to hope that the thing that you want is in combat, not having to hope that there's a counter specifically in the combat step. It's nice to just be able to 1-mana destroy, and it's nice. And again, in terms of the versatility, again, and this is just the way we view X cards a little differently. Like to me, you'll see like on my list, which maybe you'll like, maybe you won't like, right? But like the things with X spells and then the things with prepared spells, I have at different CMCs than just the casting cost. Because to me, I think. When we come down to mana value specifically, I would ask you, there are 2 use cases. Where does this card go on your deck list? Where does this go on your curve? Because you're essentially arguing 2 spots, which is good because it can scratch those 2 itches. But like to me, this is only half of a 1-mana CMC spell, and Erode is better. So that's my take. But let us know in the comments what you think.
Yep. Totally fair. All right, much appreciated, Jared. That was a fun conversation. And we'd love to hear, if you're doing mono blue, does this make it in for you? Or right, you're just doing bounces and counter synergies, right? Maybe it doesn't work for you meta because everybody's just doing counters. So it doesn't matter that you made it a 1/1 because it's got 5+1/+1 counters on it. Okay. Okay, so then, Jared, 2 CMC. What is the best card out there?
The best thing in this set that I was able to come up with right now, I think might in fact be Leech Collector. Again, I really like it because it comes prepared. It's low enough where even if you don't get to do the thing, it's going to be an aristocratic style of sack to ping your opponents, have them lose life while you gain lifestyle decks. So worst case absolute floor is you have a 2-mana body that you can sack with all of the different sack triggers that are available in the black color suite. And you could probably get effects just for that. But for 1 extra mana, everyone else could lose some life, and that's something you care about. I think about decks like Keurig, Son of Yawgmoth. They run those. Obviously, we've mentioned Yashola, where at the very least, it doesn't necessarily help you with the CMC ability, but it helps you with the, if opponents lost 2 or more life, because, essentially if you cast one CMC 3 or greater non-creature spell, that's 2 life, and then all you have to do is just rock Bloodletting once, right? So that's pretty easy to do. I think this is a great card. And, I've looked at some other cards too. I could name drop a bunch right now, but I want to save some thunder for Evan. Evan, what am I not thinking about here?
Yeah, and so I think it is good to note, right? There's definitely a caveat. We may have covered the best card in the first part of our list as we were going through the color combinations, and so where it's needed, we may just do a quick mention and then blow past it. For me, my attempt at the best 2 CMC was a creature called Tester of the Tangential. It's a 1/1 Djinn Wizard with Increment, which is that whenever you cast a spell, if the amount of mana you spent is greater than this creature's power or toughness, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature ability. And then also it says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you may pay X. When you do, move X +1/+1 counters from this creature onto another target creature. So it's definitely very counter synergistic. But even if you're not doing a counter strategy, you can just use Tester of the Tangential to pump up the rest of your board and continue to add counters on it itself. I think one of the interesting things here, and something I think important to note for your strategy, is that this second ability is only triggering at the beginning of combat. So that move, if you played 3 spells, if you cast 3 spells, and you added +3 counters onto Tester of Tangential, then you're moving up to 3 if you're paying that X at combat. You're not getting a chance to spread it around, pay 3, put 1 here, put 1 here, put 1 here. No, it's move everything or up to everything that Tester has onto 1 creature. I think that's really sweet to be able to boost your board there. So I think definitely be watching, especially if you're jumping in on the increment. I really like Evolve and really liked Evolve, which was sort of the precursor here. And so it's cool to see increment, something else that's boosting up the board just for you paying attention to your strategy building as the turn goes on and as the game goes on. So that's my 2. All right, Jared, that means that we are on to the 3 CMC. To Jared's point, this one you may consider as a 4, but ultimately I think because this is going to be a prepared creature, spoiler, and the spell it has, you're going to have to wait a turn on it. So my choice for best 3 CMC is Grave Researcher. So this is a creature, 3/3, 2 and a black. It's a Troll Warlock. And then at the beginning of your upkeep, surveil 1. Then, if there are 3 or more creature cards in your graveyard, this creature becomes prepared. And so my argument here, there's definitely been some folks that are not as hyped about this one, and that's because your spell, which is Reanimate, which is a 1 black sorcery, put target creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control, and you lose life equal to that creature's mana value. And so understood that people are like, just if you're trying to reanimate stuff, put a reanimate spell or something that does something similar into your deck instead. And I totally get that. I think my argument here is that you're trying to make every piece of this work. So you've got a 3/3 body for 3, so that's pretty sweet. You're surveilling, so you're really trying to grow that graveyard. And then your reanimate can point anywhere, any graveyard. And so you're trying to make the most use out of all of those pieces. If you're not caring about surveil, then you don't want to do that. So hopefully you're making the most out of that versatility. You're making the most out of each of these pieces. If you're also doing a troll/warlock kindred, that's an extra bonus as well. But my belief is that if you're playing this smartly, people are not looking at it too much. You're surveilling, which is helping you fix and sculpt your deck and your graveyard at the right speed. And you're potentially getting reanimate constantly. So that's what I would push for. Is that this is a good spell. to just keep bringing stuff into and out of your graveyard, while maybe even having a strong blocker or strong creature to swing with as well.
Yeah, so I've got good news for you and I've got bad news, my friend. I think that unlike last round with Erode, which we're not going to talk about, I think this round you've been able to convince me to put this ahead of Emeritus of Woe.
Ooh.
I think you made a strong argument against me. I don't think you made a strong argument against myself or us combined. So what I mean by that is, to me, I think now I'd probably put this above that one. I think it'd be easier to get the reanimate. And I think mana-wise, it's a little bit more productive and something you could do and make meaningful impact at a lower mana and catch your opponents off guard a little easier without leaving yourself exposed defensively. But, my friend, there were two cards, a blue card and a black card, that we had as our favorite blue and blacks, respectively, and I don't think it's better than the two of those. So I had Pensive Prodigy as number one here. Not going to get into all of it because we already touched it. And then I would put Withering Curse above this too. I think Withering Curse is broad enough, just to kind of retread a little bit. It's broad enough where it's going to work in a lot of different decks that are going to have a lot of shared synergies, where it's going to be a 3-mana board wipe. And Pensive Prodigy is going to be okay in every deck because it's going to be worst case scenario, you're drawing a card every one of your turns. But if you're playing even remotely into the counter strategy, then even at brackets 2 and brackets 3, you should be drawing a minimum of 3 cards per turn cycle, but probably closer to 5, which makes it basically the blue version of, I'm blanking on the name, you'll pull it up, the green spell, the green enchantment that lets you do that in Edge of Eternity. But you know what I mean? Like, this is yeah, this is that. So
Yep, fair, totally fair.
yeah, I mean, no surprises here. It's fixed what's broken. I just haven't seen anything like this. I mean, there's a couple of things that, you pay X, right? Like, I think Immortal Servitude was the name of one of the cards, right? But it's like you pay 3 mana up front and then you pay X. So, to get 2 mana CMCs, you're looking at like 5 mana cards, right? Because you're getting that, for 3 mana CMCs, you're not paying 6. So it's a little off. And then on top of that, there's other ones where it's like 1 card of each type. And again, I might be conflating which are doing what, but the important thing here is that at 4 mana value, bringing back everything without having to target anything, which could be something that opponents can counter, and get real utility. And by the way, you're doing this for artifacts too. I just think it's far and away the best at that value. What are your thoughts, Evan?
Yeah, totally agree. I think fix what's broken and also Vicious Rivalry. Can't really beat those two. That doesn't mean I'm not going to throw a third card in just to continue talking about stuff. So if you liked what I talked about with Grave Researcher, let me hit you with another one. For 4 CMC, let's talk about Eccentric Pest Finder. So this is a Troll Druid, 4 total CMC, 2 black and green. Okay, and so same sort of deal. I think all parts here are relevant. So there's a 5/5 with Trample. So right off the bat, before you even get into everything else, for 4 CMC, 5/5 with Trample. Okay, so already I think we're in good spaces. So now at the beginning of each end step, if you gain life this turn, this creature becomes prepared. So the prepared spell is Turn Stones, which is a black and a green sorcery. For each opponent, you create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. So the way I see this playing out, you care about life gain, you care about sacking. You've already got a 5/5 body, so it does mean that there are probably some eyes on it if you're swinging with it. But outside of that, there's potential that every one of your turns, or if you're turning turn stones into an instant, maybe you're doing it constantly, because it is at the beginning of each end step. So I would say the best way to get your value out of it is to somehow gain life each turn and send out turn stones every turn somehow. Some sort of Vidalcan Ori sort of like thing. And if you're in a commander game, you're getting 3 pests every time you pay that black and green. So there's potential that you're really flooding the board. I recognize something important with Strixhaven is that we've got 2 types of pests now. One is all about when it dies, you gaining life. The other one's about it attacking. We've put a lot of focus here on the older of the Pest, the with the sack triggers. There are some benefits to the attacking ones, and we may get into some of those later. But the big thing here is if you care about gaining life, getting these creatures as your sack fodder, look no farther than eccentric Pest Finder.
I thought that was a good, clever find. I mean, I think I'd still like the two we have above it. I think I'd still make room for like Professor Delphine. Am I getting his name right? Professor Delian Fell, right? I think that's above it too. And I think we talk about like spells being off their mana cost, right? I like what you did with the last one, and I think I'll raise you a expansion algorithm, right? Which is another X spell that I think once you get to the 4 mana spot, because it's 2 blue and an X to proliferate X times. I think at that point it becomes playable, especially in decks that I'm sure no one plays here because me and Evan are both upstanding guys. No one plays poison in our pods, right? But to me, it's like I've been a proponent for a long time that poison counters need to be raised. Again, maybe it's a skill issue. Let me know if you think I just need to get good real quick in the comments. But with that being said, like if it's if card red, pay 4 mana, your opponent is now 20% on the way to lose the game. I think most people would play that card. So I think that alone, like once you start getting to 4 mana expansion algorithm, especially in poison decks, but even just in counter decks, right? So I mean, Evan talked about how a little less versatile than the card he mentioned at 1 mana, right? But I mean, another way you could do it is, I'm going to hit you for 1 commander damage, but maybe you're close enough where all of a sudden, if I make 1 commander damage, 6 commander damage because I'm proliferating +1 counters, right? There's different ways to do it. I just think poison's the most effective. So anyway, long story short is the 4 CMC spot is stacked. Nothing compares with the first 2 that we mentioned, but there's some other good finds in there. So go diving.
I am starting us off for the 5 CMC. I will tell you, I talked twice about prepared creatures. I definitely fell for this trap again. And so for me, when it came to 5 CMC, I really think Emeritus of Ideation is pretty cool. It is a 5/5 creature. It's 5 CMC, 3 blue. It's a human wizard. You've probably seen it all over the internet. It's got flying and ward 2, enters prepared, and whenever this creature attacks, you may exile 8 cards from your graveyard. If you do, this creature becomes prepared. The prepared spell is Ancestral Recall, which is a 1 blue instant to have a target player draw 3 cards. It's wild to see this spell, back in the lexicon again. So I was blown out of the water with this one. I think there's definitely some hoops to get this going. It's cool that it enters prepared. So really, you may be thinking about this as a 6 CMC. The ward 2 is pretty sweet. And then if you've got the ability to do some copying or things like that, getting it prepared again may be really tough unless you're filling that graveyard. So it doesn't work everywhere, but if this is your first time hearing about this card, here you go. Ancestral Recall is out there again, and you can get it for probably still a good chunk of change. Jared, what's your thoughts on Emeritus, and where do you go from there?
I mean, I think I had the same thought of everyone when I saw it for the first time, which is, oh my God. But I think with that being said, I very quickly fell into the other camp that I think it's a little overhyped. That's why we didn't have it higher in some of our other things. I think it's a great card. I think of all the ones, it's not alone. I think even one of the other Emeritus that we mentioned for green, right? Abundance. Yep. Their ability to get re-prepared is contingent on being able to attack. So I like the fact that this one has flying because, especially in a 1v all game, now Evan and I also do plenty of 1v1, 2v2, but especially in those 1v all games that are the staple that is Commander, right? Those round robin, like 1v-alls, you're going to find someone without flying it every time. And the ward 2 kind of makes it, I think, of the ones with a flying trigger, of the ones with an attack-based re-prepare trigger, I think it is the best equipped to do that. I think one might have trample, but I think even still, flying is a little more evasive. Can't trample a Death Toucher and then get the ability again, right? So my thing is, I think that's not the problem for me. But I think one of the things that I was thinking that I know others have voiced as well is that you're freaking out. Ancestral Recall is a banned card. Arcanus the Omnipotent isn't even a game changer, right? So that's the one that's a 6-mana wizard where, you have to tap a turn, right? Just kind of like, so it's a little better than that because this comes out prepared, right? So you can kind of do your thing the first time, right? But Arcanus the Omnipotent is essentially a 6-mana drop, if I'm not mistaken. It's a wizard that you tap it and you draw 3 cards, right? So like to me, in some ways that's better. I think more often than not, this will be better than that. But for all the people freaking out and saying, oh my God, like Ancestral Recall's back on the menu, the fact that I was able to name a non-game changer, and not just me, other people have made this claim too. There's a comparable 6-drop to it. And again, we're talking 6 drops to it. Right. I don't know. I think there's a lot of cards. I mean, I think even like Lute the Pathfinder, right? The first Lute we had, the cute one with all the exhaust effects, right? Where it comes out, and I'm pretty sure it was kind of the same thing, right? Or again, this is repeatable, but it was a 5-mana creature with a pay blue, draw 3 cards, exhaust ability, right? So essentially at the turn, Lute comes out, if I'm not mistaken, because Lute has haste, right? So if I'm not mistaken, that is another 6-mana creature that taps on the turn it comes out to draw 3 cards. So to me, that's at least comparable. This moves the needle in some respects, but in terms of being an absolute game buster, I don't know. Let us know what you think in the comments.
Yeah, you've got to make it worth it. And so if you do want to skip ahead, I will say I can already tell I'm going to attempt to make this creature even more worth it with my commander choice, which is at the end of this video, but before our long list. So keep an eye on that, and I will attempt to say, if you've got this commander and this Emeritus, you're going to benefit really strongly. We'll see if it goes off the way I want it to.
Again, I slot the things with prepared into different CMCs based on that plus they're prepared, so you get at least one. So I had Emeritus of Abundance here, because to me, you do both and it's 5 versus 6 with whatever, right? So that's just me doing math poorly or better or trying to be too clever for my own good. I'm going to stick around for your video because I have no idea who your commander of choice is now.
Excellent. Perfect.
Or at the very least, it's different than who I thought it would be before you made that comment. But anyway, yep.
I like to keep you on your toes, Jared.
Yeah, it's really working. Too good.
Why don't you start us off with the 6 CMC?
Again, well, I kind of gave away my hand, right? But like to me, if you're looking at things as 6 drops, now Emeritus of Woe becomes playable. And now you can get that Demonic Tutor on the stick. I know I kind of been back and forth oscillating between how good I think the card is or not. But I think that at the end of the day, when you're looking at it as a 6 drop and you have ways to, and we talk about ways to deploy it. We've talked about this with Abundance in terms of just, how do you deploy these guys safely, right? Because especially the more exciting the ability, there are some people I've talked to, and, feel free to disagree. I'm curious what you all think the best card, the best game changer is, right? But I have spoken to people that have listed Demonic Tutor as the best game changer. I think with this one, it's very much one of those situations where you would want some sort of counter magic or revival magic or some sort of protect up, or, there are a couple of cards in even mono black that let you redirect spells, right? So if possible, I do think this dies the turn it comes out, but I think at the very least, you need to have 6 mana. I don't think Emeritus of Woe, unless you're at like turn 1 Soul Ring, right? Into a Signet or something like that. So now all of a sudden you're playing Emeritus of Woe while your opponents are still setting up. I think this card dies fairly quickly, but I would like to have at least 6 mana to play it. And if you could get past that, I think that more often than not, you're going to be playing this in decks where at least 2 creatures have died this turn, right? I think that's fairly doable in a lot of these color combinations. So I don't think it's quite as easy of a condition to hit as others, but I think it's definitely more likely than not that's something you could do. I think that Demonic Tutor is a game changer for a reason, and it's pretty good to have it on a stick. But at the very least, you want to get 1 Demonic Tutor trigger off, which is why I have this as a 6. But Evan, I'm curious, do you have a conventional 6 drop?
Yeah, I'm attempting here. So, it may be, for what it does, it may be too high cost, but I did at least want to point to this new card. And this is Echo Casting Symposium. So it's a 6-drop sorcery lesson. Total CMC is 6 for blue. Target player creates a token that's a copy of target creature you control. So that's interesting, but here's the bigger part that's attempting to make it why it's 6. So it's got Paradigm, which is a new keyword. So after you cast your sorcery, you then exile it. And after you first resolve a spell with this name, you may cast a copy of it from exile without paying its mana cost at the beginning of each of your first main phases. So what that's basically saying is that this spell gets cast after you've done it the first time, every turn after on your first main phase. And you get to create it. You choose your player, and then you create a token that's a copy of target creature you control. I was racking my brain a little bit about the various targets here and why this is even worth bringing up. I've never done this before, but I think somebody, and you can tell us how, could make the reason of pointing at somebody else and saying, you get to create a copy of my target creature. You may be doing like a strange, like give people bad stuff, and you get to choose both targets. And that'd be really interesting to hear. My thing was more so, you get a free token every turn after you finally got to 6. Getting to 6 isn't too tough. We're starting to get towards the later halves. Or you're sort of the like end of what a good mana curve is nowadays. But I at least thought that was an interesting, get a copy of what you like the best. Or somehow, do something funky and change it up and say, hey, congrats, you get one of these. So that's my push there. And I think Paradigm's really interesting, especially if you can cheat it all out.
I think it's interesting, but I'm happy you mentioned Paradigm. I think there are some funky ways that people can cheat Paradigm too, but I think having a ceiling of this card is going to be cast every turn or copied every turn, pretty cool.
I get to start the 7 CMC. Oh, and wouldn't you know it, my number 1 pick has Paradigm on it. Okay, for 7 CMC, I'm suggesting Improvisation Capstone. This is 5 red and red. It's a sorcery lesson. Exile cards from the top of your library until you exile cards with total mana value 4 or greater. You may cast any number of spells from among them without paying their mana costs. And then it's got Paradigm, which, as we just said, exile the spell, and then you get to cast a copy of it from exile without paying its mana cost at the beginning of each of your first main phases. So first I'll say, for both of these Paradigm spells and for anything else that really hits this, it is a cast. So anything that's triggering off of casting sorceries and instants, triggers, any sort of storm count watches this. So it's really interesting to be seeing some of that. And then I just figured you're getting a lot of extra, spells on top of it. You may cast any number of them. So if you've got lots of low CMC plus your Improvisation Capstone, you may be getting 2-3 cards off of each of these and just throwing them on. It's definitely for a specific build, but we're in the higher CMCs now, so I want to at least point it to it. You made it to 7, congrats. Now you're getting free cards and free casts for the rest of the game there.
Well, I told you I was between a 7-drop and a 1-drop for my red. It was Improvisation Capstone. I think that's the best one. I think that a runner-up would be... it's basically Storm on a stick or Prowess on a stick, right? Yeah. I think that not all of the improvisations, and they did this probably deliberately, if I had to guess, right, aren't beaters, right? So, at that same mana value, there's Restoration Seminar, which is return target non-land permanent card from your graveyard to the battlefield with Paradigm. I think that's so much slower than our Improvisation Capstone, Yeah. I think, if you cast 3 or 4 spells in a turn, Improvisation Capstone is essentially a turn without having to spend mana in some cases, if you've built your deck properly, and also if you're getting a little bit of luck on your side in terms of the draws on the instants and stuff. And you compare that to Restoration, and it's we already have Virtue of Persistence, which at least has a -3, a -3, or I think it's -3, -3, Adventure stapled onto it too. Granted, this can do non-land permanents, but the thing is most of the decks that care about returning 1 non-land permanents that aren't creatures, there are cards that return multiple artifacts. We've talked about one of them today. There are cards that return multiple enchantments. We've talked about that today. There are ones that do that for enchantments and artifacts. There are cards that are more efficient at doing it with creatures, right? So just, I don't know, this seems kind of a little bit toolboxy. And, you know, to really get your money's worth, you would need things that kind of equal 7 mana right from the start. So if you're running like big spells or like, you know, Reanimator with White Knit and you're, you know, you're putting like a Valgavoth, you know, in a graveyard, then okay, fine. Or in a big Eldrazi, sure. But I think for the most part, that's too slow. So I think the runners up would be Prismari the Inspiration.
Yep.
Flying, Ward, pay 5 life, instant and sorcery spells you cast have Storm. I think pay 5 life is not as impressive as a Ward as you think. And it basically, we talked about, you only get so many big, flashy finishers in instant sorcery focused decks. Prismari is competing with all of those now.
First, let me say, Prismari the Inspiration was my backup, so I'm glad you brought that up. I was very excited to see Storm on a card. I was not thinking we were ever going to see Storm on a card ever again. So super cool to see it. Totally understood that it's tied to a 7 cost. Makes tons of sense there. But it's a 7 cost that you could put in your command zone, which can be tough. But if you really want to try that Instant Storm for the Izzet, blue-red, totally get it. Now, Jared, we get into the 8 CMC.
It's Witherbloom the Balancer. We've talked about it before, but again, literally like a paradigm shifter. People have been talking about this, and again, maybe it's a vocal minority, so let us know in the comments what you think. But I have heard people say that this is the new Golgari commander. Now, I don't know if that's true or people just are trying to like mess with people to get other certain more painful commanders out of the command zone. But I think either way, it's 8 mana, but it's not. You're casting it for much less. And then being able to cast these big spells, you know, there's a lot of green and black drain effects. There's a lot of X, you know, spells that you can cast to like get big creatures onto the field too, in green specifically, right? So I think it's really fun in the command zone. And I'd actually be really curious to see, this one might have applications in the 99. I think this is a card that might be good enough. And I'm not going to say this with the most confidence, like we've mentioned other cards here, but sometimes they're going to have multiple modes or multiple things that they can turn on. And sometimes one mode does matter more than the other, right? So I think that my thing is, you know, I think this is an awesome card to build around Witherbloom the Balancer. But I think the reason it might have applications in the 99 is that maybe you just care about the affinity for creatures. Or maybe you just care about granting the affinity for creatures for other things, but you're willing to pay the 8 to get it out there. Unclear, but the point is I could see either of these modes be at least a support piece worthy in a 99. And I think it's just, again, it's a whole new world in the command zone if that's the type of thing you're into. So that's exactly what it is.
Yep, I think that's a good choice. Witherbloom definitely turning black-green on its head, and I'd be really interested to see some builds out there for folks that are doing that one.
Yeah, send us deck list, seriously.
Okay, so now I'm going to make an attempt on my 8 CMC. Why I chose it for 8 is that if you do more than 8, because it is an X spell, if you do more than 8, then it's really paying for itself. So we couldn't get out of this video without talking about Mathemagics. So that is a blue sorcery. It's XX, blue, blue. Target player draws 2 to the X cards. And hopefully you've got one of the versions that tells you then what the exponents are. And the reason why I chose 8 CMC is that if you pay 8 total mana, which means that you get 3 as your 2 to the 3 for your X, that means you draw 8 cards. So you pay 8 CMC, you get 8 cards, and then anything more, you get much more. It's also very fun that if you really do have that ability to get lots and lots of mana in here, maybe you're... I don't know if people are going to make this for CEDH somehow. Please, I'd love to see that. That sounds crazy. But, you know, once you get into the, like, 2 to the, like, 5, 6, 7 plus, you're probably pointing that target at someone else and making them draw their whole deck. And drawing their whole deck is a lot worse probably than milling their whole deck. Unless you're doing your own self and you're doing the Thassa's Oracle or some sort of thing like that. But I'm just really intrigued. I want to know if people are putting just tons and tons of mana into Mathemagics for really crazy stuff. And if not, maybe you're just doing it for 8 to draw 8 cards. So I had to talk about that one. So play it for 8, get your 8, and then you can do crazier stuff. That's for people wiser than me. More Quandrix stuff. I'm just scratching the surface. Jared, what are your thoughts on Mathemagics?
I'm really happy you mentioned it. You mentioned people smarter than you. You're smarter than me, man. So like to me, I've got no chance at that. I'd be interested in a couple of deck types, right? So I mean, I think it's a limiter sample size. Again, like I have a Rafine deck. I could talk all day about the Rafine deck. Evan has, we mentioned his, some of his decks. Talk all day about those. We're trying to go for things with like large swaths of utility for like either really popular decks on EDH Rec or things that just can slot into a bunch of different types of decks or broader themes that are very popular, like +1 counters. So my thought with Mathemagics is that they made this card for a reason, and it was more than just college flavor for Quandrix. There are people out there smart enough to do it. I think the dumping a bunch into X is one way. Two of the ways that I thought of, but I have no expertise in, so we punch it over to you guys to let us know, right? Is one thing I thought of is decks that are big on doubling things or copying things. Like, what's the utility of this card with something like the new Azula that everyone's freaking out over because you're going to combat, you're firebending, you're getting all this extra dump of mana. So maybe, obviously it can't be your blue because I'm pretty sure firebending is red mana, but maybe this is your X cost, right? So maybe it's things like that. And then a bunch of the Avatar stuff that came out like Agni Kai, right? And we're like, okay, cool. Like there's a fight. And if you win the fight, you get a bunch of extra mana, as far as I understand, right? So maybe you're doing these types of mechanics where you're almost like wagering things in combat or fight type mechanics where you're getting things like that and you're able to copy spells like that. Evan already mentioned the mechanic Casualty, right? So, the blue, red, black commander from the old Mastro set, right? Like he's big on Casualty and you can copy spells, right? So copying and doubling casts, I think that's pretty interesting too. I think that the other thing that interests me that I also have no expertise in is, Evan over here runs a Storm deck. Before that, if you wanted to run instant sorcery stuff in blue, red, green, my understanding is that it was either Riku of Two Reflections, good card, by the way. Can't blame you. But the other one is Magus Lucia Kane. I apologize, I'm not a Warhammer guy, so I'm sure I'm butchering that. But she would be interesting to me as an X Spell Matters commander who also has synergy with green, where it's, and I've seen this from Evan in his Storm deck, it's, I'm doing good, but the one thing I can't do with, whether I'm running Kess in the command zone, or whether I'm running Veyron in the command zone, or, whether I'm running Narset and Lightning Exile in the command zone. The one thing that I can't emulate with a blue-red-green Storm deck is I don't get instant sorcery payoffs for casting ramp spells. So you have the ramp spells of the green, so you've got more mana to play with at the start, and then you're also running things like Elementalist Paladin and other X spell kind of multipliers or doublers or payoffs or extra mana boosts in an X spell deck, or maybe all of a sudden, you're playing Mathemagics for, even more than 6, right? And all of a sudden you're netting positive values on that instead of just a 1-for-1. So again, if you're an X spell person, if you're a copy person, if you're just smarter than me and Evan, just let us know. We'd be curious to see some deck lists, or how are you making Mathemagics work? I'm happy you brought it up though.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, anytime I see these X spells, all I think about is the Hydra commander. That one that's like the main place I see X spells. Those folks that play that deck know that they're gonna add so much extra into the X on the start, and they're gonna get a lot of benefit. So even if they play Mathemagics for like 4 total CMC or whatever, they're getting Hydras, they're getting so much on top of that card draw. Yep, wild stuff. So I will make a confession here, Jared. We're at 9 CMC now, and I did not have any cards for that spot. I do have a fake case for 10 CMC, but I did not have anything for 9. Do you have anything for 9?
My friend, I think we're at 10 CMC or bust now.
Okay. All right, so the one that I have here before we get into some of our final thoughts and talk a little bit about what we think the most interesting or a cool commander for ourselves or anybody else would be, the 10 CMC card from the set that I wanted to point out was Fury Gale Flocking. That's an 8 red sorcery. This spell costs 1 less. to cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. So if you're playing really well, it's just red, red. And then for each opponent, create 2 3/3 blue and red elemental creature tokens with flying that attack that opponent this turn if able. They gain haste until end of turn. So yeah, no good if you're paying it and playing it for 10. Really sweet if you're doing it just red, red or something close to there. You're getting some bodies on the board. You're also not losing these flying tokens. Sometimes you're in spells similar to this, you're creating the tokens and then they vanish at end of turn or end of combat. So it's sweet that there's potential in a commander game. You're getting 6 tokens that fly that you get to keep around. And if you get to cast this again for cheap or storm off of it, then you just got a lot of bodies potentially for cheap. But yeah, for 10 CMC, don't do it. If you've got the way to make it much, much cheaper, then take a look at it.
So there is another 10 CMC card.
Okay.
That makes it the backup. The reason it's the backup is because there's only 2 10 CMC cards. My first one was Fergal Flocking too. Fergal Flocking, I think, is good for all the reasons you outlined. But I think it's a card that, unless you're running, specifically the new Prismari deck, or you're running the old Prismari deck with Zaphi at the helm, which was kind of a cast spells of mana value 5 or greater matter type thing. The higher mana value for the instant and sorcery, the better. And then there's also, the new Zaphi. You just really need to be tracking the fact that there is a small niche number of commanders, including the new Rutha, that are trying to reward you from getting away from the storm, from the prowess, from the cantrip type red-blue instant sorcery, magecraft type synergies that we've seen, because they're just trying to diversify the color slot a little bit. There's some support for this in Final Fantasy, so look for some support for this in Final Fantasy. It's not non-existent. But the point is, unless you're running that, I think you'd be pretty bummed to see Fergal Flocking within your first 5 or 6 turns, right? Because it really does scream finisher, right? Someone counters you, right? So you really want Magecraft triggers set up to make sure, okay, I got countered, but I got double, let's say you have Aeron out, right? I got double countered. I have 2 cards that draw me cards every time I cast an instant, and those got doubled. So it was pay 10. They wasted a counter. I drew 4 cards, right? So it's just a way to kind of turn lemons into lemonade, so to speak. The only other card at this mana value is the Dawning Archaic, right? So it's a 7/7 legendary creature. It's a 10-drop. It's colorless. And it costs 1 less cast for each instant and sorcery card in your graveyard. It's got reach, but then it has, whenever the Dawning Archaic attacks, you may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. I think even despite the knocks on Fergal Flocking, I think this card requires a lot of setup, right? It requires no one messing with your graveyard. It requires you finding ways to dump things in your graveyard, whether that's you casting a bunch of inefficient things, or a bunch of really inexpensive things, so that way you can efficiently deploy this guy, and then all of a sudden now you're getting discounted. But if that's the case, let's say you're running a bunch of 1-mana cantrips, right? So you run 10 of those, so now it's 0 mana, right? Or let's even say 6 or 7, right? No, that's not a 6/7 joke, but I walked into that and I apologize, Evan. But was going to say that, there's also a thing with this card of being too, it's tough to make it efficient, but then you also run the risk of making it efficient for your own good, because if you're just running 1-mana cantrips, then you're getting a discount to cast one of those every time it attacks. So once a turn, you're able to cast a 1-mana spell thing again. There's just better ways to do what this is trying to do. Whether it's things like a cast or a Narset and Light in Exile that are letting you play things like the Graveyard, or the new Flashback card that we just mentioned, or, just other ways to do things. There are a couple of cards with the prototype ability that let you bring things out at different mana values based on that. There's obviously a lot of things that are able to support, retrieval of instance and sorcery cards, things like Mystic Retrieval, or, the new blue-black, MDFC, right? So there's just better ways to do this. If you're running an Avatar tribal deck, have fun. But if not, Fergal's better. But even then, I'd be pretty careful with this one. But yeah, we found 2 10 CMC cards We did what we could with the 2.
All right, so we finished all the CMC. We did all the color wedges prior. We're nearing the end here. The fun category that we ultimately wanted to give each other was, we've seen this whole set. What is a viable commander out there that you could either build around yourself with all that is in Magic's history, or something that you'd be really intrigued to see people build? What is a possible legendary creature or legendary something that can be in your command zone that you were blown away with, that was unique to you? So, Jared, you get to start us off.
You're sure?
Yes, start us
Okay.
off.
If you're sure, then it was your backup at the white-black spot. I think Silverquill the Disputant is so interesting, right? We've talked about flipping green-black on its head with Witherbloom. Silverquill does the same thing for white-black. But the cool thing about Silverquill, we now have a true instant sorcery white-black commander. There's some really cool things you could do. I think white-black, at least amongst the 2-color pairs, is, when you get 3 colors, a little different, has the best removal suite in Magic, in my opinion, right? Have cards that we mentioned like Fracture and Swords to Plowshares. And, I could list them all, but I mean, honestly, like between those and board wipes, like, there are plenty of instances you would want to cast, and now you have a commander that wants you to cast them. Because again, as I've been discussed earlier, 4 mana Flying Vigilance, each instant sorcery spell you cast has casualty 1. So, I mean, that's the other beautiful thing about this, right? You're flipping a category on its head by making white-black care about instant and sorceries. But the casualty 1 feels very at home in white and black decks that have that aristocrat flavor, that want to sack things, right? So I think the cool thing is that this can go in so many decks. This can go in a Tasia Karlov, this can go in a Y'shtola, right? Like it really does, it perfectly bridges the instant sorcery and matters decks with the decks that care about, sacrifice. I think the closest thing we have to that were cards in like the Maestros, the red, black, blue color identity. And I think that, this is, you're giving a license to white, black to use casualty 1 in a meaningful way. And white, black does both the generation of things you want to sack, does the removal of things you want to clone, getting payouts for sacking those things. It just does them better. So anyway, I think that there are more powerful commanders in this set. I won't be building Silverquill, full disclosure. That's only because I had a Von Dam Aristocrat deck that I merged into my Y'shtola deck. Long story short, the archetype doesn't interest me because I'm already playing this archetype. Otherwise, I think there's nothing like this, And I think that this is nothing like even the ones I have, so I'm not trying to like berate that either. I just think that, there are other cool stormy things in other colors. There are other cool, like multiplying type things in blue-green. Like I think everything else is either cool or like a little bit of a step in a different direction from like the retread, other than, we mentioned Witherbloom. But I just think that this is such a nice synergy between meshing something that white-black's always been known for with bringing in a completely new direction. What about you, man?
Yeah, so first I'll have to apologize to the Strixhaven fans out there that have recognized that we're doing a pretty good job covering 3 of the Elder Dragons. I don't think, nothing against Quandrix and Lorehold, as I would say, especially I had Quandrix a couple times for some of the backups with the Cascade, but that's not what we're focusing on here. And that's, if you've gotten anything from me, I like weird and unique, especially in the command zone, or something that I feel like you're not really getting anything else and can be built in a lot of different ways. So my attempt at an interesting commander is, and I thought it was a sleeper, but with the current cost that I'm seeing price-wise, it may be that actually the whole world's caught onto this interesting thing. Without further ado, my commander choice is Muddle, the Ever-Changing. So this is blue-red, Izzet, or Prismari, 4 total CMC, 2 blue-red. It's a legendary creature, elemental, otter, shapeshifter. And then whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, Muddle becomes a copy of up to 1 target non-legendary creature you control until end of turn, except it has Myriad. Myriad is a keyword, which means whenever it attacks, for each opponent other than defending player, you may create a token copy that's tapped and attacking that player or a planeswalker they control. Exile the tokens at end of combat. So my interesting thing here, is you've got this ability to, and if you jumped immediately from Emeritus of Ideation to here, my push here is that I think for the set, for Prismari, I think Muddle, outside, I was like, Rutha does a lot of awesome things. The reason why I chose Muddle, why I think it's the most interesting commander and why I'm pushing it for the set, I think Muddle is the Prismari commander that makes the best usage of the prepared creatures with that ability to potentially copy them, attack with potentially a strong body and create these other potentially prepared creatures. There's potential to mix it with like a firebending or something that gives you some of that extra mana, and then you're suddenly creating all these copies of prepared creatures and sending out lots of draw spells at instant speed. Maybe with this Emeritus, you made a copy, you did an Ancestral Recall 4 or 5 times in one turn, you're drawing 15 or so cards or whatever. I think there's also just a number of ways you can make all these different copies. So I think it's an interesting commander, and the as brave as I am, the push I'm going to say here is that if you're also interested in this commander and you want to see if it can actually be built into a viable deck, if this video gets 1,000 views or over 1,000 views, I will create at least a virtual deck list for Muddle to show that it can be done, and I will post it. So don't you worry. So that's my challenge, because I think Muddle can be really crazy. I think people can take it in so many different ways, and I challenge you to make an interesting Muddle deck. Jared, what do you think about that?
I think I'll like or comment or subscribe or whatever gets you to build this thing. I've seen a couple of other channels do their review of the pre-con deck, and none of them have gone with Muddle so far. But it's very clear to me, in a way that isn't always with a lot of these like review videos of the pre-cons, that the people that are going with Rutha are pissed that they're going with Rutha, and that they're going with Rutha squarely because they think the deck is set up more for Rutha. And it's like, it's with a modest upgrade versus a brand new deck, there's only so much you could do to like really pivot the card around the backup commander when it's not like a 50-50 type situation. Yeah. So my point is, I think there's demand for it. I think the interesting thing with Muddle, and I'm not brave enough to do it, which is why I'm happy that you're going to do it, is that, I'm just not sure, because a lot of the things with the prepared spells, correct me if I'm wrong, that's sorcery speed spells, right? So the creatures would come out with Myriad, they would have to survive an attack, which I think is doable. You mentioned Emeritus of Ideation, right? Like that's flying, not the weakest flyers at that, and low, right? So, maybe one dies, one lives, and then maybe you've done enough to make sure that Muddle lit, right? So I think it's possible. But again, I don't think you could take it for granted that every single creature with Myriad is going to survive to the point where it gets to do that. Now, I think that there are some interesting cards you could put in Muddle to kind of like, make that work, right? Like we talked about some of the cards before that, kind of give you an elusiveness, right? So,
So I'll make that case even easier for you, Jared. With Myriad, those tokens are meant to be exiled at the end of combat. So everything that you're doing with prepared needs to be able to be played in combat. That's why I talk on firebending. Like, you really gotta maximize your combat here. Muddle demands, if you're muddling with the prepared, it demands that you're preparing with the enters on the instant. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I'm just talking with you. Like, does firebending help you break sorcery speed timing restrictions?
No. Firebending, the focus is getting. Am I correct in that firebending mana only comes up and stays for combat?
That's my understanding, right? So my thing is, it's like if I think there's that one blue creature that we haven't touched on yet. It's another one of the prepareds, and I think what it does is brainstorm is its thing, and I think that's an instant speed. So I think Muddle could work with that, but just be careful that everything's at instant speed, but point taken. That could be an interesting use case for model. Very nice.
There you go. I'll also throw one other in there, just because we're
Please.
starting to get to the end. We're starting to get into the like final calls. The other sleeper that I wanted to point out is encouraging Aviator, and I think it works well with Muddle. This is a 2/3 Bird Wizard, 3 total CMC, 2 and 1 blue. It has flying. Whenever this creature attacks, it becomes prepared, and then the prepared spell is Jump, which is an instant for 1 blue. Target creature gains flying until end of turn. So could you imagine Muddle instead becoming Encouraging Aviator and allowing 3 or 4 creatures before combat gets to the blocker step, making your team all have flying?
That's pretty cool. And I'm thinking about the use cases, both to help the Myriaders survive and then Muddle and, the other things survive too. Like, I think the super core magic card that isn't screaming Universe Beyond in any way, Hide from the Ceiling with Aunt May snooping on Spider-Man. That's a cool bounce spell. Obviously, there are things like, the various flicker ability ones in blue. So I think that's kind of a cool thing that you can do for a couple of spots. And then, the other thing I was thinking, at first I'm like, Slip Out the Back doesn't work, right? Because Slip Out the Back's not going to have it redeploy from exile. But what it could do is, if these copies need to go away at the end of combat, what if you slipped out the back on a copy and then it's phased out when it's supposed to go away, and then you could hold on to a copy? That's kind of cool. That's kind of a sneaky little thing you can do with Muddle. Yeah, so no, it's growing on me. Not enough for me to do, but it's not enough for me to send out some flyers for people to get you to do.
There we go. I appreciate the brain turning on that one. I also saw that it's an otter, and otters got a lot of love with Bloomburrow, so I could see people drawing this and creating a otter kindred. I could see it going that way as well. But I think the big thing was myriad copies, an attempt here to round out the set and really try to make prepared, let you draw a lot of cards with all those instants that you get. All right, so we covered the commanders. Jared, we're sort of wrapping here, and just wanted to hear sort of your take. You wanted to talk a little bit about maybe some of the tough choices here that you had to make when it came to colors or CMCs. Just sort of give some of those parting thoughts.
Yeah, you got it, man. All right, so I think that some of the choices were tough. I think one of the things that we both commented on when we were preparing, and we didn't share picks with each other, but we just shared general trends of the things we were seeing, for things like, hey, am I going crazy here, or is there no CMC 9 card here, right? One of the things we talked about is that these colors were not created equal, right? I think people say that about the commander format in general, but just in the set itself, it seemed like certain color pairings were stronger than others, and it seemed like, even the monocolored stuff, like blue and black, particularly this time, I felt like were knife fights. So anyway, I think if we look at the list of the cards that I actually picked, the cards that I personally care about playing, that I'm like, oh, this is just not just a generic card, but I'm excited. I think in a generic sort of way, I'm getting copies of Petrified, Hamlet, and Erode. That's happening, right? The cards that I think are not unique to me, but okay, I know which decks I'm going to slot them in, other than this is just a good card, are Pensive, Professor, and Withering Curse. With that being said, the cards that I didn't include here that I'm excited about are some of the red-white creatures that we've already talked about that lets you cast things from exile and encourages that, but it also gives your commander trample. I think I've seen a lot of things. It's always tough when you break a deck apart to realize, hey, maybe it's time I bring this thing back. I've done it once. I have a Zayatora deck, but this was a really hard sell set, and I don't know if it's enough, right? But between Lorehold Charm, there's a case that Narset in Lane Exile comes back and supplants cast, because there are some really good cast from exile support and really good ways to make Narset's attacks, because for that card, Narset needs to attack in order to then be able to cast things from exile. That's its whole thing, right? But it needs to survive, right? So some of the cards that we talked about on elusivity, right, matter for that, but trample is another good way to go. So there are a few cards there that make me really second guess, maybe it's time to bring it back. And then the other thing I'd say in terms of tough decisions is I really like the white-black cards in this set, right? Some of them we talked about, but some of them we haven't as much. There's a creature that's a 2-drop that has a stapled on ability where, it has to be prepared. It's not a prepared creature, which is why it didn't make the cuts in many spaces. But essentially, it's got a 3-mana spell that lets you draw cards. That's a really interesting use case for Y'shtola, right? Because it's a 2-drop creature. A lot of the ramps package I currently have in Y'shtola is 3 mana or greater, so it's not competing with anything on my curve in terms of that. And then it's got instant Y'shtola trigger every single time with a 3 mana spell that helps Y'shtola do all the things it wants. Conciliator's Duelist is just a really good 4-drop in the 99 of a lot of decks that care about the things that it's good at. It's when this creature enters, draw a card, each player loses a life. It has Repartee, right? Which is whenever you cast an instant or sorcery that targets a creature, exile up to 1 target creature. Return that card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step, right? So there are a lot of commanders that care about Blink. I think it's particularly good in decks like the Sir Vondam Sunstar Exemplar deck I mentioned earlier, right? Where it's, there are times when Vondam wants to be exiled because when its power and toughness is 4 or greater, or at least its power, then when it's gone, you can actually destroy a target non-land permanent, which is a fantastic ability if you could get it on repeat. So this is going to enable that. But the other thing that makes Vondam potentially go from a 2/2 to something with 4 power or greater is when another creature that you control is either exiled or destroyed, it gets a +1 counter and it gains a life. So, Vondam essentially will negate the fact that each player is losing a life, because now every player is losing a life except you, because you're basically going, life neutral. And I think that's pretty cool to be able to get that exile on repeat in a deck that, it's not an instant or sorcery deck, but cares about that. And facing Dusk Mage is good because it gives you that draw 2 cards. Each player loses 2 life on demand for Y'shtola as long as it's prepared, which happens as soon as an opponent draws their second card each turn, which isn't too hard to beat.
Final thoughts here for me is, if you're looking at this set and you like blue, you like instants and sorceries, counters, drawing, I think you found easy synergy there. Blue is in 3 colleges, got a lot of focus all throughout on spells and spell slinging, instants and sorceries just in general. So if you're about that, you've got it with Strixhaven. You're in a great spot. 2, Jared's point about something very interesting with Silverquill, with Lorehold. I think for those strategies that they've got within the decks, they have a lot of cards from this set that empower them, whether it be targeting other people's creatures and the goading mechanic on top of it, the auras, Lorehold with the exile piece, spirit synergy. So you can really just dive in just within that college, just within that color group, and get something unique and synergistic with it. But finding things outside of that, when we were doing these lists, when we were trying to look at things that, easy adds for everything that we've got currently, the Orzhov Silverquill and the Lorehold Boros, it was tough sometimes to find those things that felt like instant adds, or hey, don't miss out on this one if you've got any of these other cards. It was really just, hey, if you're doubling down on this college, get all of the cards within this set that focus on this thing. So that's sort of my set review piece there. Blue is eating good for anybody that's loved blue for the past 30 plus years. But Strixhaven for the Silverquill and Lorehold has something that I feel is fairly unique for this set in time. And you can jump on that and wait for those strategies to grow in the future. Well, thanks everybody for joining in. We really had a fun time getting to talk on this set. Please, we'll take all feedback. Let us know how we did. Let us know what you want as we get into the next set, which will be Marvel, which we'll see, in about a month and a half or so. Thank you, Jared, for doing this with me. That was tons of fun.
No, this was an absolute blast. Happy to be a part of this as long as you'll have me.
Please like and subscribe, join the channel. There are many ways to engage with us, and some of it is about contributing your own content as well. There are cards that we missed, create the videos and the audio for it, and we'll add it to the channel, and then you get a stake within the channel's profits as well. Hey folks, whether you have watched the whole video thus far or you're skipping directly to this point, this is the start of the rapid fire list. This is just us saying the categories and the names for all the cards that we did for the long form piece. So if you're going straight to a pre-release or you're about to buy some singles, what have you, you don't need to know all the extra pieces, all the debate. You just need to know what these cards are and what they do. Here's where you start, and we really hope that you like this format and you're able to get what you need from just hearing the card names, seeing them on screen. Without further ado, we'll get started on that.
Petrified Hamlet.
Diary of Dreams, Augusta, Order Returned,
Erode. Pensive Professor.
Exhibition Tidecaller, Withering Curse,
Leech Collector. Emeritus of Woe. Flashback.
Fateful Tempest, Pest Rescuer,
Glorious Decay. Emeritus of Abundance. Fix What's Broken.
Silverquill, the Disputant, Lorehold Charm,
Aziza, Mage Tower Captain. Sanar, Unfinished Genius.
Resonating Lute, Tam, Observant Sequencer,
Mind into Matter.
Vicious Rivalry,
With Witherbloom the Balancer. Petrified Hamlet.
about the Turbulent Land, Fractalize,
Erode. Leech Collector.
Tester of the Tangential, Grave Researcher,
Pensive Prodigy. Fix What's Broken.
Eccentric Pest Finder, Emeritus of Ideation,
Emeritus of Abundance. Emeritus of Woe.
Echo Casting Symposium, Improvisation Capstone,
Witherbloom the Balancer.
Mathemagics, Fury Gale Flocking,
Dawning Archaic. Silverquill the Disputant.
Muddle, the Ever-Changing.
I hope you enjoyed that. Do you agree with the content provider? Was anything missed? Does this episode spark any topics you might want to cover? Let us know. We here at Spell Table Showcase MTG try to mix entertainment with education, and so can you. We've got plenty of Magic the Gathering topics that we have opinions on, but we want to hear yours too. If you're interested in recording a similar video for this series and making some money off it, send an email to spelltableshowcase@gmail.com and we'll tell you what to do. We want this to be a channel for the people and also by the people, so we hope to hear from you and learn about that topic that you are passionate about. Well, that about covers it. Thanks to our sponsors for their support. Be sure to subscribe to be notified when the next episode drops. Have a great rest of the day. Bye for now.